The night hung heavy over Rome, thick with fog that curled around the ancient spires and twisted streets like smoke from an unseen fire. The moon struggled to pierce the clouds, leaving the city shrouded in an almost tangible darkness. From the shadows, the silhouette of St. Peter's Basilica rose like a giant sentinel, its domes looming over the silent city. There was a hush, a breathless tension, as if the stones themselves remembered centuries of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Somewhere deep within those walls, behind doors that had not been opened in decades, a figure moved with deliberate purpose. They were unseen, yet their presence seemed to bend the air around them. An invisible authority felt rather than witnessed. Candles flickered in distant corridors, casting elongated shadows that danced across frescoed ceilings and marble statues. The soft sound of footsteps echoed lightly, absorbed almost instantly by the cold, polished floors, leaving only a whisper that the city itself seemed to hold in suspense. The figure paused before a door of blackened wood, worn smooth by hands that had long since disappeared into history. They ran a finger along the intricate carvings, tracing a path only they could read. And then, with a subtle push, the door yielded, opening into a passageway that led deeper than most maps dared to record. Here, the air was cooler, heavier, carrying with it the faint scent of wax, old parchment, and something more elusive, something like the weight of centuries pressing against the soul. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the movement beneath its cobbled streets. Rome, the eternal city, carried its pride openly. Its grand piazzas, ornate fountains, and towering obelisks. But beneath that pride lay hidden corridors where the true power of history whispered to those who dared to listen. It was in these passages that the figure moved, swift yet silent, a shadow among shadows. They paused before a small alcove, retrieving a worn manuscript bound in dark leather. The edges were frayed, the ink faded to a soft brown, but the weight of it was undeniable, as if it carried the hopes, fears, and sins of countless generations. They opened it carefully, as if disturbing a fragile heartbeat, and the candlelight revealed words scrawled in a meticulous hand, words meant to be seen by no one outside the circle of those who had sworn an oath centuries ago. Outside the hidden chamber, a storm began to stir. Thunder rolled softly in the distance, a reminder that even the heavens seemed to mark the importance of what was unfolding. The wind tugged at shutters and rattled windows, carrying with it the scent of rain and the faint metallic tang of the city's history. Lightning briefly illuminated the streets below, revealing the eternal monuments of faith and power, only to vanish moments later into darkness. Inside, however, the storm was distant. Time here moved differently, measured not by the hours or minutes of ordinary life, but by the rhythm of secrecy and the weight of knowledge too dangerous for the public eye. The figure's eyes lingered on the manuscript, absorbing lines that spoke of visions too extraordinary to fully comprehend. There were warnings, predictions of upheaval and corruption, of unseen hands guiding the fates of kings, popes, and empires. Each word was a fragment of a puzzle that had been whispered through generations of guardians who had understood its power but feared its revelation. They traced the text with reverence and fear, for this was no ordinary history. It was a prophecy that carried the weight of destiny itself. And yet, even as they read, a shadow passed across their features. A hesitation, a recognition that knowledge of this magnitude was both a privilege and a curse. Beyond the walls, Rome remained unaware. In the piazzas, lanterns swayed, casting soft halos over empty streets. In distant towers, night watchmen shifted, unaware that a secret older than the city itself was being unveiled just beneath their feet. Somewhere, far from the echoes of ordinary life, the world held its breath. The figure moved again, replacing the manuscript with a care that suggested both respect and fear. Each step along the corridor seemed amplified, the sound resonating as if the stones themselves were recording this moment. They paused before another door, one older and heavier, adorned with a carved emblem whose meaning was known only to a select few. With a key that had traveled through centuries in secret hands, they unlocked it, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into deeper darkness. As they began their descent, the air grew colder, almost oppressive, and the light from the candles above seemed to retreat. Here, the sense of history was almost suffocating. The walls, slick with damp, bore inscriptions that had faded into near illegibility, yet the weight of their message remained. Somewhere below, a faint draft carried whispers, perhaps imagined, perhaps real voices of those who had come before, warning, urging caution, urging silence. The figure pressed on, driven by a combination of duty, curiosity, and a fear that gnawed at the edges of their resolve. At the bottom of the staircase, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The room was lined with shelves carved directly from stone, filled with manuscripts, scrolls, and artifacts whose significance had been deliberately obscured. Candlelight revealed glimpses of gilded lettering, strange symbols, and drawings that seemed almost alive in their detail. Here, time felt irrelevant. Centuries of secrecy pressed inward, as if the chamber itself were a living witness to the passage of power, knowledge, and ambition. The figure moved carefully among the shelves, each artifact a story, each book a keeper of forbidden truth. And then, from a hidden niche, they retrieved a small, blackened tome. Its cover so dark it seemed to absorb the flickering candlelight rather than reflect it. With the tome in hand, the figure paused at the center of the chamber. For a moment, the world outside, the city, the storm, the ordinary lives of millions, ceased to exist. All that remained was the weight of the prophecy, a whisper of secrets that had survived wars, inquisitions, and the relentless passage of time. The figure opened the book and, in the silence of that underground sanctuary, read the first lines aloud. The words were soft but carried a gravity that seemed to vibrate through the stones themselves. A warning, a call, a destiny written long before the present had any claim to it. Outside, the storm grew louder, but within the chamber, the world held still. Rome, eternal and unknowing, lay suspended between light and shadow, unaware that the secrets of the Black Pope and the forbidden prophecy he guarded were being stirred once more. And somewhere in the silence, an unspoken question lingered, pressing against the walls, the candlelight, the air itself. What truth, so dangerous it had been buried for centuries, was about to awaken? The manuscript in the figure's hands was older than any living memory, its leather cover darkened by centuries, and its pages brittle yet remarkably preserved. The ink, faded to a warm sepia, shimmered under the flickering candlelight, as if alive with secrets too potent for ordinary eyes. This was no ordinary text, no mere chronicle of events or doctrine. It was a prophecy, forbidden and forgotten, whispered about in the corridors of power but never spoken aloud. Its origins were shrouded in uncertainty, traced in fragments across scattered libraries, hidden monasteries, and private collections. Some claimed it had been written by a seer who had glimpsed the rise and fall of empires. Others whispered that it was dictated directly by a force beyond mortal comprehension, a hand guiding humanity from the shadows. The manuscript had vanished countless times over the centuries, appearing only in fleeting glimpses. A scholar in Florence claimed to have copied a portion before the pages were confiscated. A monk in Spain was said to have hidden it in a hollowed altar, never to be found again. And yet, in fragments, hints of its existence survived in letters, coded journals, and whispered tales among the few who dared speak its name. The figure traced a finger across a line of elegant script, almost afraid to disturb it, and read aloud a passage that spoke of a shadow rising over the faithful, a guide unseen yet sovereign in influence. The words sent a shiver down the spine, as if the manuscript knew that those who read it were already part of its unfolding story. The prophecy was not merely a record of future events. It carried instructions, warnings, and riddles encoded in allegory, demanding interpretation, insight, and courage. It predicted turmoil within the church, the subtle manipulation of kings and rulers, and the emergence of an individual who would shape destinies unseen by the public eye. Some lines were chilling in their clarity, describing acts of betrayal and corruption that later historians might interpret as coincidence. Yet here, in the manuscript, they were prophecy. Others were enigmatic, cloaked in symbols and metaphor, leaving readers to wonder if the knowledge was a gift or a curse. The figure shivered, aware that the mere act of reading these words was dangerous. An invisible thread connecting the past to the present, binding them to a story that had been kept in shadow for centuries. The city outside remained unaware. Rome, bathed in the muted light of the moon and the occasional flash of distant lightning, carried on as if oblivious to the weight of destiny hidden beneath its streets. Citizens slept in their apartments, the clatter of carriages and the distant hum of the Tiber River unnoticed by those below. And yet, every so often, the storm would howl, rattling shutters and echoing through the empty piazzas, as if nature itself conspired to remind the city of the forces moving unseen. The prophecy, while ancient, felt immediate, a presence as tangible as the damp stone walls surrounding the figure. It was a whisper from history demanding attention, daring comprehension, and threatening consequences for those who might attempt to ignore it. Fragments of the manuscript hinted at the origins of the prophecy itself. It was said to have been commissioned by an order that existed long before the Jesuits, a brotherhood whose purpose was to protect the truth from those who might exploit it. This order had long been erased from the records, erased from memory, yet their work endured through the careful preservation of a single text. The figure's eyes lingered on passages describing clandestine gatherings, hidden councils, and the delicate manipulation of events across centuries. Names were disguised, dates obscured, and places cloaked in allegory, but the underlying message was clear. Power was never what it seemed, and those who wielded it in silence could shape the fate of nations without ever being named in history books. The prophecy spoke of a figure both feared and revered, the Black Pope, a title whispered in shadowed corridors of influence. Unlike the Pope of the public eye, who governed with ceremonial authority, this figure exercised control behind layers of secrecy, a puppeteer whose strings reached kings, cardinals, and the wealthy elite. The manuscript described this role in reverent, almost fearful language. A custodian of secrets, a guardian of forbidden knowledge, an invisible force whose will shaped events in ways that often contradicted the surface of history. As the figure read, the implications became chillingly clear. The prophecy did not merely record events. It forecast a continuum of influence, a hidden hand guiding the church and, by extension, the world. Yet, for all its precision, the manuscript was not entirely comprehensible. Its cryptic passages were interwoven with allegory, parables, and symbolism that required intuition as much as intellect to decode. One line suggested that the prophecy itself could be misinterpreted, misread by those unworthy or unprepared, leading to calamity rather than understanding. Another passage warned of guardians who would punish indiscretion, hinting that those who sought to reveal the prophecy might vanish without trace. The figure could almost hear echoes of past seekers in these warnings. Scholars, priests, and even kings, all ensnared by curiosity and ambition, all marked by the dangerous allure of knowledge they could barely comprehend. The storm outside intensified. Thunder rumbled through the city, its vibrations reaching even the deepest corridors of the Vatican's hidden passages. Rain began to hammer the cobblestones above, yet below, in the dim chamber, time seemed suspended. The figure paused to absorb the weight of the prophecy, feeling as though the centuries had condensed into this single, fragile moment. They were part of a lineage, a chain of guardians and seekers whose lives had been intertwined with these forbidden words. Every decision, every hesitation, every careful step they had taken to reach this place now mattered more than ever. And then, with a deep, almost imperceptible exhale, they turned a page to a section the manuscript had labeled with an ominous symbol, one that seemed to pulse faintly under the candlelight. The words that followed were unnerving, speaking of events yet to come, of turmoil, upheaval, and secret forces that would rise to challenge both the faithful and the powerful. It was a vision of history as an intricate game of shadows and intentions, where human ambition, fear, and faith were all pieces manipulated by an unseen hand. The figure's pulse quickened. This was not history in the making. It was history already written, waiting silently in these pages to be acknowledged, interpreted, and perhaps acted upon. The room seemed to shrink, the candlelight flickering as though acknowledging the gravity of what was being read. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to human fear or fascination, while inside, the figure continued to read, each line a link in a chain connecting the past, present, and an uncertain future. Somewhere in the depths of Rome, centuries of secrecy pressed against the walls, as if the city itself were alive, holding its breath, waiting for the prophecy to reveal its truth. And in that silence, as the wind howled above and the candle flame trembled, the figure understood something undeniable. Some secrets are not meant merely to be read. They demand obedience, discretion, and, above all, the courage to carry their weight without faltering. Beneath the grand streets of Rome, where tourists wandered unknowingly and the bells of churches rang in the distance, a hidden world existed. A labyrinth of corridors, stairways, and chambers that had been built, expanded, and sealed over centuries. These corridors were not on any map, and no ordinary guide could lead a visitor here. They were designed to confound, to protect, and, most importantly, to conceal. The figure moved through them with a careful certainty, as if the very walls themselves whispered directions, revealing hidden doors and secret alcoves only to those who knew how to listen. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying the scent of damp stone, mold, and the faint trace of incense long extinguished. Shadows clung to the corners of the corridors, twisting in ways that made the passages feel alive, almost sentient. Statues of saints and angels lined some of the walls, their stone eyes fixed in eternal vigilance, watching over secrets that the world above would never suspect existed. The figure's footsteps echoed softly, swallowed quickly by the labyrinth, leaving only the faintest whisper behind. A sound that seemed insignificant yet somehow oppressive, as though the city itself were listening. At times, the corridors opened into small chambers, hidden offices, or libraries carved into the rock. Dusty shelves held manuscripts whose covers were cracked and ink faded. Yet the knowledge within was potent, sometimes dangerous, and always forbidden. Some texts spoke of theology, others of politics, and some hinted at prophecies that predated even the founding of the church itself. The figure ran a gloved hand along the spines, pausing briefly on one ancient codex, its leather cover blackened as if burned in part by time itself, yet preserved with meticulous care. These chambers were sanctuaries, archives of secrecy, places where history had been hidden, not destroyed, preserved only for those deemed worthy or daring enough to seek it. Every so often, the figure paused before a door that bore no handle, only a subtle indentation in the stone. With a practiced motion, they pressed a hidden latch, and the door swung open to reveal another passage. Each hidden corridor seemed to fold into another, a maze designed not merely to confuse, but to test those who pursued its secrets. The deeper one traveled, the more the labyrinth seemed to reject intrusion, as if aware that knowledge gained without respect could be fatal. The figure felt the weight of generations pressing from every side, ancestors who had walked these corridors before, some leaving notes in the margins, others leaving only silence, their fates unknown to anyone but the walls themselves. At one point, the corridor narrowed dramatically, forcing the figure to stoop low, the stone ceiling rough against their fingertips. They moved with a cautious grace, the silence around them absolute except for the occasional drip of water from above. In the darkness, the imagination can play cruel tricks, and the figure could almost see forms moving beyond the reach of the candlelight. Shadows of those who had vanished centuries ago, guardians or victims of knowledge too dangerous to reveal. A single misstep could lead to disaster, and yet, the thrill of discovery pushed them forward. Every corner held the possibility of revelation, every turn a potential encounter with secrets the world above had never imagined. Eventually, the corridor opened into a vast hall, one carved directly into the bedrock of the city. The walls were lined with alcoves, each containing scrolls and books bound in leather, vellum, and metal clasps. The candlelight revealed faint gold leaf on some covers, intricate patterns that hinted at the importance of their contents. Some texts were written in Latin, others in forgotten dialects, and a few bore symbols that had no known translation. The figure's eyes scanned the room, taking in the magnitude of what had been hidden here. Each shelf, each book, each scroll represented centuries of human ambition, fear, and devotion, all deliberately concealed from the world above. The figure moved carefully along the rows, fingertips brushing over the spines. Some books radiated a tangible energy, an almost imperceptible vibration, as if the knowledge within resisted containment. They pulled a thick tome from a shelf, its cover embossed with a symbol that matched the markings in the prophecy they had discovered above. The manuscript felt heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning, as if centuries of secrecy had converged into this single artifact. Opening it, the figure found diagrams, annotations, and marginalia in a hand that seemed impossibly precise, each line calculated to obscure as much as to reveal. Some passages described events that had already occurred, others hinted at futures that had not yet arrived, all tied together with an intelligence that spanned generations. The labyrinth was not merely a physical structure. It was a metaphorical one as well. Each hidden passage, each secret chamber, represented layers of deception and protection. A fortress built not of stone alone but of discipline, secrecy, and vigilance. It was a living testament to the power of concealment, to the belief that knowledge could be more dangerous than swords or armies. And yet, for all its design, the labyrinth seemed almost sentient, aware of the intruder who had dared to traverse it, as if deciding whether they were worthy of the truths it contained. As the figure progressed deeper, the candlelight revealed inscriptions etched directly into the stone walls, phrases in Latin that had been nearly worn away by time. Some were prayers, others warnings, and a few were cryptic statements that seemed to resonate with the prophecy in the manuscript above. The figure traced the letters, feeling the cold stone beneath their fingers, aware that each word had survived centuries of potential destruction, preserved for the exact moment when someone with the courage to read them arrived. The chamber seemed alive with the ghosts of those who had walked here before. Scholars, priests, and guardians, all bound by a duty to protect knowledge that could alter the course of history if misused. Long before the labyrinth, before the hidden manuscripts and shadowed corridors, there was a man whose name was rarely spoken aloud. A man whose influence would stretch across centuries and whose title would inspire fear and awe in equal measure. He would come to be known as the first Black Pope, though in his time, the name was whispered only in secrecy, a cautious acknowledgement of power that could never be displayed in public. Records of his life are fragmented, blurred between legend and history, yet what survives paints a portrait of a figure both extraordinary and enigmatic. Born into a time of turbulence, when kings and popes wielded authority with both sword and decree, he rose not through wealth or lineage, but through intellect, discipline, and an uncanny sense of timing. From a young age, he displayed a mind that grasped not only knowledge but the subtle art of influence. While others sought power through display, he understood its quiet, persistent form, the ability to shape events without ever being acknowledged. Tutors remarked on his patience, his almost unnatural ability to remember conversations, to sense intention, and to anticipate consequences before they occurred. He moved through the world like a shadow moving across the sun, never fully visible, yet leaving an imprint on everyone he touched. By the time he entered the Society of Jesus, his reputation was already forming, an aura of mystery, intellect, and strategic genius that would follow him for the rest of his life. The Jesuits, newly founded at the time, were devoted to obedience, discipline, and service. Within their ranks, he found both a platform and a canvas, a structure upon which he could project his vision. Rising through their hierarchy with deliberate speed, he caught the attention of those who understood that his ambition was tempered by a sense of purpose. He was neither reckless nor impatient. Every decision, every act of loyalty, was measured, precise, and calculated to achieve long-term influence. Some whispered that he was incorruptible, others feared him for precisely the same reason, sensing that a man who operated outside ordinary desire posed a threat to established power. His charisma was subtle, magnetic in a way that drew men to him without their fully understanding why. He had the ability to instill trust while maintaining an invisible distance, a paradox that made him both approachable and untouchable. He cultivated alliances, not for personal gain, but for strategy, weaving a web of loyalty that extended beyond the walls of the church. Kings, nobles, and clerics alike found themselves drawn into his orbit, often unaware that they were being guided by a hand they could not see. Those who sensed the depth of his influence either sought to emulate it or feared it in silence. To contemporaries, he was a figure of legend, a man whose presence commanded attention, and yet whose intentions remained deliberately obscured. It was during this period that the prophecy first became entwined with his life. Manuscripts, whispered secrets, and coded letters began to find their way to him, not by chance, but through careful orchestration. Some believed that he had sought them, others that they sought him. The result was the same. He became the custodian of knowledge deemed too dangerous for the uninitiated. Within his hands, the prophecy evolved from a collection of cryptic visions into a guiding framework, shaping decisions, directing influence, and determining the outcomes of events that would ripple through history. He understood the burden it carried, the danger of exposure, the potential for chaos, and yet he accepted it, recognizing that some truths demanded guardianship, even at personal cost. His contemporaries began to notice a pattern in his actions. Decisions that seemed innocuous, interventions that appeared coincidental, often carried profound consequences. Wars were influenced subtly, alliances shifted, and the fates of nations bent in ways that no historian would later be able to attribute to a single individual. Yet all of this occurred behind a veil. He never sought recognition, never displayed ambition openly. To the public eye, he remained a devoted servant of faith. To those who understood the truth, he was a master strategist, a quiet architect of destiny whose fingerprints were visible only to the initiated. Some say that his rise also sparked fear, even within the highest echelons of the church. Popes, cardinals, and monarchs sensed a presence that was difficult to define, a man whose power seemed both moral and almost supernatural. Letters and reports from the era speak in coded language, referring to the shadow above the faithful, a guardian of knowledge who moved unseen yet determined outcomes. These references, obscure though they are, paint a portrait of a figure whose authority was unquestioned, not because it was declared, but because it was felt. Influence, after all, need not be displayed to be absolute. Yet his life was not without conflict. Guardianship of the prophecy brought enemies, some hidden, some overt. Rival factions within the church sought to undermine him, to wrest control of knowledge that could tip the balance of power. There were attempts at manipulation, secret accusations, and subtle threats, all of which he navigated with a combination of patience and foresight. Every confrontation was an opportunity to reinforce loyalty, test intentions, and strengthen the network of trust and secrecy that would become his legacy. By the time he reached the height of his influence, he had transformed from a man into a symbol, an idea, a presence that transcended mortality. And yet, for all his skill and foresight, he remained human. Diaries and letters preserved by those closest to him reveal glimpses of doubt, moments of fear, and the weight of responsibility. The burden of holding secrets so potent that a single misstep could alter the course of history was immense. Some nights, he walked the silent corridors of Rome, manuscripts in hand, contemplating the delicate balance of obedience, power, and morality. He understood that influence carried not just opportunity, but accountability, the invisible strings that could entangle both the innocent and the guilty alike. By the end of his life, the first Black Pope had solidified a legacy that would outlive him, his presence lingering in the corridors he once walked, in the manuscripts he safeguarded, and in the very architecture of the church that concealed his influence. The title itself, whispered only in secrecy, would endure, passed down to those who could inherit not only the authority but the weight of guardianship. He had demonstrated that power need not be visible to be absolute, that influence could be wielded in silence, and that knowledge, if properly guarded, could shape the fate of humanity itself. And so, as centuries passed, the legend of the first Black Pope became intertwined with prophecy, secrecy, and the labyrinthine corridors of Rome. Though time would obscure his name and history would disguise his influence, the echoes of his presence endured, hidden in shadows, guiding the flow of events in ways that the world above could never perceive. In the stillness of the hidden corridors, where manuscripts waited and secrets whispered, the memory of that man lingered. A reminder that some of the most powerful figures in history are never seen, yet their reach touches everything. The Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, had always been cloaked in both reverence and suspicion. Founded with a mission of education, spiritual devotion, and service to the Church, their influence stretched far beyond the obvious. From the earliest days, the order cultivated a reputation for discipline, intellect, and unwavering loyalty. Yet beneath the surface of public admiration lay a more intricate story, one in which strategy, secrecy, and subtle power operated as naturally as prayer. The first Black Pope had understood this from the beginning. He saw that true influence was not wielded from pulpits or thrones but from the quiet corridors of knowledge, from the minds of those trained to think, act, and decide with precision. The Jesuits' rise to prominence was deliberate. Schools and universities were established, not merely to teach religion but to shape thought itself. Students were imbued with analytical skills, philosophical reasoning, and a disciplined understanding of human nature. They were trained to read the world as carefully as they read Scripture, to anticipate the actions of rulers and the reactions of crowds, to see patterns that others missed. In this way, the order became more than a religious institution. It became a network, a silent influence threading through politics, education, and diplomacy. The Black Pope, as its leader, understood this network's potential. Through it, he could guide generations, manipulate outcomes, and ensure that the prophecy he guarded would not be forgotten or misused. What made the Jesuits uniquely powerful was their ability to operate in shadow. Unlike monarchs who displayed wealth or popes who projected authority, their influence was invisible. A single Jesuit tutor could shape the beliefs and decisions of a prince. A single ambassador could guide the choices of a king. The order's reach extended from the courts of Europe to the farthest colonies, each Jesuit a node in a vast, unseen web. And yet, the true master of this web was not the visible pope but the Black Pope, the superior general, who moved through centuries with careful calculation, ensuring that the hidden strings remained unbroken. The influence of the Jesuits was not confined to politics or education alone. Science, philosophy, and even art were arenas in which the order excelled, often guiding innovation and intellectual thought according to principles that aligned with both faith and strategy. Laboratories, observatories, and libraries became tools for insight, allowing the Black Pope to anticipate societal shifts, technological developments, and even the movements of rival powers. Knowledge itself became a weapon, wielded not with violence but with precision, shaping events long before they reached the public eye. Each act of guidance, each subtle nudge, reinforced a pattern in which the prophecy could unfold as intended, protected from interference and misinterpretation. But influence is never without opposition. Throughout history, the Jesuits faced skepticism, fear, and outright hostility. Monarchs wary of invisible control, cardinals suspicious of intellect wielded as power, and rival orders threatened to dismantle the delicate balance of authority they had established. The Black Pope navigated these challenges with remarkable skill. Confrontations were rarely public. They were resolved through diplomacy, persuasion, and, when necessary, strategic maneuvering. Letters, coded messages, and intermediaries carried intentions across distances, ensuring that the order remained resilient even as suspicion grew around it. It was a game of patience, foresight, and subtlety, a game in which the stakes were nothing less than the future of the Church itself. The order's secrecy extended to its internal operations as well. Initiates underwent rigorous testing, not merely of intellect but of loyalty, discretion, and moral alignment. Those who failed were quietly removed from the inner circles, sometimes permanently, leaving no trace of their presence. This rigorous selection ensured that the prophecy, the very blueprint of hidden influence, would never fall into unworthy hands. Each member became a guardian, a link in a chain extending from the first Black Pope to the present day. And with each generation, the subtle power of the Jesuits grew, their presence woven so deeply into the fabric of history that few could recognize its influence, even in hindsight. Public perception of the Jesuits often contrasted sharply with their true operations. To ordinary citizens, they were educators, missionaries, and spiritual guides. Their work in communities was visible, tangible, and admirable. But behind the visible acts lay an invisible network of observation, counsel, and guidance. Decisions made in far-off palaces could be influenced by Jesuits who never left the classrooms or libraries where they trained. A tutor's advice to a young prince could alter the course of a war, shift the succession of a kingdom, or preserve the church from scandal. Each interaction, however small, was a thread in a tapestry that stretched across continents and centuries, orchestrated under the careful oversight of the Black Pope. And yet, the power of the order was not solely a matter of intellect or strategy. It carried with it profound moral responsibility, and with responsibility came the potential for human error. The prophecy itself contained warnings. Knowledge misused could bring devastation. Ambition unchecked could corrupt even the most disciplined mind. The Black Pope and his successors understood that their role was not only to guide but to restrain, to intervene only when necessary, and to protect the balance between revelation and secrecy. Each decision was a delicate act, a dance between morality and necessity, a test of character as much as of strategy. In many ways, the Jesuits became the living embodiment of the prophecy they protected. Their education, influence, and secrecy were all tools to ensure that the words hidden in manuscripts centuries old would survive. Their very existence was a testament to the idea that power, when properly concealed and responsibly wielded, could shape history without ever revealing itself. Through discipline, devotion, and foresight, the order became a silent hand guiding the course of nations, a shadow shaping destiny while remaining unseen. By the time the first Black Pope passed from the world of the living, the Jesuits were no longer merely a religious order. They were a force, a living network of guardians who could preserve and execute a vision that stretched far beyond any single lifetime. Schools, universities, missions, and libraries were all instruments in a grand design, each contributing to the hidden continuity of power, knowledge, and prophecy. And though the world above remained largely unaware, the influence of the Jesuits flowed like a hidden river beneath the surface, carrying the secrets of the past into the uncertain future. And so, the figure who now walked the labyrinth beneath Rome understood that the prophecy, the Black Pope, and the Jesuits were inseparable. To follow the manuscript was to follow the invisible web of influence that had endured for centuries, a network whose reach extended into the very heart of history. Every corridor, every hidden manuscript, every act of subtle guidance was part of a living system designed to protect, to conceal, and to shape the world according to a vision only a few could comprehend. The forbidden knowledge was unlike anything that could be taught in a classroom or recorded in ordinary chronicles. It existed in fragments, in manuscripts bound with blackened leather, in scrolls written in languages that had long since vanished, and in symbols etched onto the walls of hidden chambers. Each piece was a fragment of a larger truth, a secret that had been carefully preserved, protected, and, at times, fiercely fought over. This knowledge was not merely intellectual. It carried the weight of power, prophecy, and moral consequence. To understand it fully was to see the machinery of history in motion, to witness the hidden currents that guided empires, kings, and the faithful alike. The figure moved through the chamber, eyes scanning the shelves as though they could absorb centuries of wisdom by mere sight. The manuscripts were arranged with deliberate precision, not alphabetically or by subject, but according to a hidden logic that reflected the priorities of those who had safeguarded them. Some texts were heavily annotated, with marginal notes in precise, almost obsessive handwriting. Others were deliberately cryptic, using codes and ciphers that had been designed to obscure as much as to reveal. Each book was a challenge, a puzzle meant to test the patience, intellect, and moral judgment of anyone who dared to uncover its secrets. Some of the manuscripts contained prophecies, similar to the one the figure had discovered above, but more elaborate, more dangerous. They described events in terms so specific that even centuries-old historians could recognize the accuracy in retrospect. Wars, assassinations, financial collapses, the rise and fall of influential families, all appeared as though written in advance. And yet, the prophecies were never blunt. They were couched in allegory, symbolism, and metaphor. The careful reader had to decode them, to discern patterns where others might see only chaos. In this way, the knowledge itself acted as a filter, ensuring that only those capable of understanding and exercising discretion could wield its power. Other texts described rituals, ceremonies that were never meant for public eyes. Some were spiritual, designed to test faith and obedience. Others were political, ways to observe or influence events without attracting notice. A small, worn journal described a ritual performed by a select few in hidden chapels beneath Rome, a rite that symbolized the delicate balance between guidance and interference. Each ritual had rules, codes, and consequences. Mistakes were not mere errors. They were warnings, sometimes fatal, demonstrating that knowledge carried responsibility equal to its power. One manuscript, in particular, drew the figure's attention. Its cover was blackened, the leather cracked with age, and it bore no title. Inside, the pages were covered with both writing and intricate diagrams, stars, lines, and geometric shapes that seemed almost alive, shifting under the flicker of candlelight. The figure's breath caught as they traced a path along the diagrams, feeling the precision and intention behind each line. This was not just prophecy or instruction. It was a map of influence, a framework showing how power could flow unseen, bending the will of nations, faiths, and individuals alike. To read it was to understand the invisible architecture of history itself. Some passages were almost terrifying in their implications. They spoke of decisions made in shadows, of individuals whose choices shaped the fate of millions without ever being recognized. They described mechanisms of control that could disrupt economies, topple dynasties, or redirect entire nations. And yet, the manuscripts also contained guidance for restraint, warnings that power without wisdom or morality could destroy both the wielder and the world they influenced. The Black Pope and his successors had understood this, and it was why the knowledge had been guarded so jealously. It was not a weapon for the faint-hearted or the reckless. It was a responsibility that demanded courage, patience, and moral clarity. As the figure moved deeper into the chamber, they noticed scrolls and notes tucked into hidden crevices. Some were correspondence between past Black popes and trusted Jesuit advisors, letters detailing strategic interventions and philosophical reasoning. One letter described a decision not to intervene in a conflict, explaining that allowing events to unfold naturally would yield a better outcome than any direct interference. Another described the careful orchestration of influence in a foreign court, ensuring that a particular ruler acted in alignment with the long-term vision encoded in the prophecy. Each piece of correspondence revealed the meticulous planning, the foresight, and the burden of guardianship carried by those who had come before. The chamber itself seemed to hum with history. Shadows clung to corners as if aware of the knowledge contained within, and the faint scent of aged parchment and waxed candlelight carried a sense of reverence, almost sanctity. Here, the past was not merely remembered. It was alive, a force that pressed upon anyone who entered, reminding them that some truths were too dangerous for ordinary curiosity. The figure understood that the manuscripts were not meant to empower recklessness but to train discernment, to teach that wisdom was inseparable from caution. To misuse this knowledge was to invite catastrophe, both visible and unseen. Some artifacts within the chamber were even older than the manuscripts themselves. Charms, amulets, and objects whose origin was lost to history. Scholars had speculated on their significance. Tools of divination, ceremonial implements, or symbols of authority. Each seemed to radiate meaning, yet their true purpose could only be understood by someone versed in both history and secrecy. The figure touched one artifact carefully, feeling the cold weight in their hand, and for a moment, imagined the centuries of hands that had held it before, each bearing responsibility, each guarding the secrets it represented. In the far corner of the chamber, a small alcove held manuscripts sealed with wax, marked with the sigils of past Black popes. These were warnings, more than instructions, texts that had been deliberately hidden to prevent premature discovery. The sigils indicated both importance and danger, a silent code that communicated urgency without words. The figure approached, heart quickening, aware that opening these texts could reveal knowledge that had been concealed for centuries for good reason. And yet, there was a necessity, an almost inescapable pull, to uncover the truth, to understand the lineage of guardianship and the full scope of what the prophecy encompassed. Time became fluid in the chamber. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. The figure read, traced, and absorbed, moving from manuscript to scroll, from artifact to artifact. Each discovery deepened the sense of responsibility, the gravity of being a custodian of forbidden knowledge. Outside, Rome continued its nightly rhythm, unaware of the living history below, of the secrets that had guided empires, faiths, and kings. Inside, however, the chamber was alive with centuries of accumulated wisdom, a silent testament to the power of secrecy, strategy, and the careful guardianship of destiny. As the figure finally placed a manuscript back onto the shelf, they understood the enormity of what they had uncovered. The knowledge was not meant to dominate the world openly, but to protect it from itself, to guide, shape, and influence in ways invisible yet profound. And somewhere within these walls, the echo of the first Black Pope, the prophecy, and the Jesuit guardianship converged, a living continuum of wisdom, caution, and unseen power, waiting for the right hands to carry its weight forward. These were warnings, more than instructions, texts that had been deliberately hidden to prevent premature discovery. The sigils indicated both importance and danger, a silent code that communicated urgency without words. The figure approached, heart quickening, aware that opening these texts could reveal knowledge that had been concealed for centuries for good reason. And yet, there was a necessity, an almost inescapable pull, to uncover the truth, to understand the lineage of guardianship and the full scope of what the prophecy encompassed. Time became fluid in the chamber. Minutes felt like hours, hours like days. The figure read, traced, and absorbed, moving from manuscript to scroll, from artifact to artifact. Each discovery deepened the sense of responsibility, the gravity of being a custodian of forbidden knowledge. Outside, Rome continued its nightly rhythm, unaware of the living history below, of the secrets that had guided empires, faiths, and kings. Inside, however, the chamber was alive with centuries of accumulated wisdom, a silent testament to the power of secrecy, strategy, and the careful guardianship of destiny. As the figure finally placed a manuscript back onto the shelf, they understood the enormity of what they had uncovered. The knowledge was not meant to dominate the world openly, but to protect it from itself, to guide, shape, and influence in ways invisible yet profound. And somewhere within these walls, the echo of the first Black Pope, the prophecy, and the Jesuit guardianship converged, a living continuum of wisdom, caution, and unseen power, waiting for the right hands to carry its weight forward. The year was 1598, and Europe was a continent teetering on the edge of chaos. Wars had raged across kingdoms for decades, fueled by religion, ambition, and the restless greed of rulers. Spain, France, and England jockeyed for power, each nation's throne threatened by both internal dissent and external rivals. Amid this turmoil, the Jesuits were quietly at work, invisible but omnipresent, their influence extending into courts, universities, and religious institutions alike. The Black Pope of the time, the fourth in succession, had long understood that the chaos above was not mere chance but a tapestry in motion, one that required careful guidance lest it unravel catastrophically. In Paris, tensions simmered between the Catholic League and Huguenot forces. The city's streets were alive with whispers of conspiracy, assassinations, and secret alliances. Monarchs consulted their advisors, believing their plans were their own, yet behind closed doors, Jesuits acted as intermediaries, guiding conversations, influencing decisions, and subtly redirecting the flow of power. The Black Pope had anticipated the rising tension long before it became public knowledge, and letters in his hand had traveled through secret channels to place loyal operatives where they could observe, report, and intervene when necessary. Every move was calculated to prevent open war while ensuring that the long-term influence of the Church remained intact. The figure in the manuscript's chamber now traced these historical events with a careful finger, imagining the unseen network at work. A Jesuit tutor in the court of Henry IV, for example, advised the young king in private, steering him toward decisions that appeared spontaneous but were, in reality, guided by centuries of strategic insight. Every interaction, every suggestion, was designed to align outcomes with the larger vision encoded in the prophecy. The king's advisors believed themselves to be autonomous, but in truth, the Jesuits were the architects of events, their influence so subtle that it left no trace in official records. One particular episode stands out, a clandestine meeting in a dimly lit chamber, far from the public eye. The Black Pope's representative sat across from a cardinal known for his ambition and volatility. The two men spoke in coded language, their words a careful dance of influence and persuasion. They discussed the succession of power, the loyalty of key military leaders, and the timing of strategic alliances. Outside, Paris hummed with unrest, but inside that room, centuries of prophecy and careful planning converged to prevent disaster. A single misstep could have plunged the city into open conflict, yet the invisible hand guiding events ensured that tension never spilled over into chaos. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Black Pope himself received reports from every corner of Europe. Letters arrived from Jesuits stationed in courts, monasteries, and universities, each detailing subtle movements, whispers of rebellion, and hints of plots. He read these letters with patience, cross-referencing events against the prophecy's predictions. Sometimes he would intervene directly, sending instructions to operatives or issuing coded messages to trusted clergy. Other times, he allowed events to unfold naturally, understanding that restraint often wielded more power than direct action. The prophecy guided his decisions, but so did experience, intuition, and the knowledge of human nature honed over decades of observation. The figure in the chamber considered the enormity of this influence. Wars that reshaped Europe, assassinations that altered the course of dynasties, and the rise and fall of political factions were rarely matters of chance. They were carefully orchestrated, manipulated through intellect, secrecy, and strategic foresight. The Black Pope and his Jesuits did not rule openly, but their impact was undeniable. To the casual observer, history appeared chaotic and unpredictable, but to those who understood the prophecy and the network behind it, it was a carefully woven design, a tapestry in which every thread had purpose and intention. This orchestration extended beyond politics into culture and thought. Jesuits acted as patrons of the arts and sciences, influencing which ideas flourished and which were suppressed. A play performed in a Parisian theater, a scientific discovery in Florence, even the publication of a controversial book could be guided to align with the greater vision of the prophecy. Influence was subtle, like the wind shaping sand dunes, imperceptible yet powerful over time. The Black Pope understood that shaping hearts and minds could be far more effective than any sword or decree, and he wielded this understanding with meticulous precision. Yet this power came with peril. Rival factions within the church, suspicious monarchs, and ambitious nobles constantly threatened to disrupt the delicate balance. Assassination plots, secret alliances, and sudden uprisings were not uncommon. The Black Pope relied on intelligence gathered by Jesuit networks to anticipate danger and neutralize threats before they materialized. At times, interventions required extreme subtlety. A whispered warning, a delayed letter, a carefully timed gesture. Each action carried immense risk, yet it was necessary to preserve both the prophecy and the Church's influence. The most remarkable aspect of these interventions was their invisibility. The public, historians, and even monarchs themselves rarely recognized the hand that guided events. A battle averted, a rebellion quelled, or a political decision subtly altered might appear as coincidence, divine providence, or the result of human folly. Yet in truth, centuries of planning, intelligence, and insight had shaped the outcome. The prophecy was not merely being observed. It was being enacted, a living script in which the Black Pope and his successors played the role of unseen director. As the figure in the chamber studied the maps and letters, they felt a shiver of awe at the scale of orchestration. The Black Pope's influence had reached across borders, shaping the destinies of millions, yet it remained hidden. The prophecy's predictions were not abstract. They were lived realities, the silent guidance of events that no one outside the inner circle could perceive. The manuscripts in front of the figure were more than historical records. They were a testament to centuries of patience, strategy, and the extraordinary power of knowledge when wielded with discretion. And yet, there was a lingering question that haunted the figure. If the Black Pope and the Jesuits had manipulated so much of history from the shadows, what had been left to chance? Were human lives truly free, or were they part of a tapestry already designed by those who understood the hidden currents of power? The prophecy had endured, guiding events, influencing kings and shaping nations, yet its ultimate purpose remained a mystery. The answer lay hidden somewhere within the labyrinth of manuscripts, letters, and artifacts, a puzzle waiting for those brave enough to follow its threads to the end. Even the most carefully laid plans are vulnerable to the unpredictable nature of human ambition, and in the shadowed corridors of influence, betrayal was a constant threat. The Jesuits, trained in discretion and obedience, were not immune to the temptations of power, wealth, or ego. Occasionally, a trusted operative would grow restless, curious, or reckless, and the delicate web of control that had been painstakingly woven over decades would tremble. Such was the nature of history. Even in secrecy, the human heart could alter destinies, and a single act of treachery could ripple outward, undermining centuries of careful guidance. The figure in the chamber traced the lines of a letter, yellowed with age, the edges brittle and cracked. Its script was precise, yet its message carried an unmistakable weight of betrayal. A Jesuit stationed in the court of a European prince had been secretly corresponding with outside forces, divulging fragments of knowledge that were meant to remain hidden. The Black Pope had discovered the breach not through rumor or suspicion, but through the meticulous network of observation that had been cultivated over decades. Even in secrecy, mistakes could be found, and consequences had to be swift, decisive, and invisible. The order could not allow even a hint of disruption to compromise the integrity of the prophecy. Betrayal, in this context, was not merely personal, it was existential. The manuscripts, prophecies, and hidden strategies depended on absolute discretion. Every revelation carried weight, every misstep could redirect the flow of history. The Jesuit who had faltered understood the stakes, but perhaps he underestimated the reach of the Black Pope's vigilance. Letters intercepted, coded messages traced, subtle interventions enacted, all ensured that the consequences were immediate yet discreet. The punishment, like the influence, was calculated, balancing the need for discipline with the preservation of secrecy. The betrayal also highlighted a deeper truth. Even the most disciplined human institutions cannot fully eliminate ambition. The Black Pope and his successors had long known that guardianship of the prophecy demanded not only intelligence but constant vigilance against the unpredictable elements of human desire. Some operatives succumbed to greed, others to curiosity, and a few were corrupted by fear. Each incident required the delicate touch of authority, a combination of persuasion, subtle threat, and moral reasoning, to restore order and protect the continuity of guidance. The chamber itself seemed to reflect the tension. Shadows stretched long across the walls, flickering as the candlelight danced. The manuscripts, once silent witnesses, now seemed almost alive, recording each act of human failure and triumph. Symbols etched into the pages, once merely cryptic, took on new meaning in the context of betrayal. Warnings, codes, and hidden instructions designed to prevent the misuse of knowledge. The figure ran their fingers along these symbols, feeling the weight of centuries of vigilance, the layers of protection built to ensure that even when human weakness emerged, the prophecy would remain intact. Some betrayals were subtle. A single misinterpreted suggestion, a letter delivered late, a miscommunication at a court. These could alter outcomes in ways that seemed coincidental to outsiders. But to those who understood the prophecy and the network safeguarding it, these deviations were glaring, signaling the presence of human error or malintent. Each breach required intervention, not merely to punish, but to restore the careful balance of influence. The Black Pope understood that mistakes could not be ignored. They had the potential to cascade into disaster, threatening not just the Church's plans, but the trajectory of entire nations. One particularly striking case involved a Jesuit scholar in Venice. The scholar had been entrusted with a manuscript containing both prophecy and strategic guidance for political intervention. Driven by personal ambition, he revealed fragments to a nobleman whose influence was unstable, hoping to gain favor and elevate his position. The consequences were immediate. Minor rebellions ignited in local territories, alliances wavered, and the ripple effect threatened to undo years of careful preparation. The Black Pope's intervention was subtle yet absolute. Orders were dispatched through trusted intermediaries. Key players were guided back onto their intended paths, and the scholar, once ambitious, was reassigned, removed from positions where his curiosity could imperil history again. The lesson was clear. Knowledge, if mishandled, could devastate the world it was meant to protect. Even beyond individual acts, betrayal exposed vulnerabilities in the system itself. The Black Pope realized that the network was only as strong as the weakest link. Training, indoctrination, and loyalty were critical, yet they could not guarantee perfection. Thus, contingency plans were built into every protocol, every letter, and every ritual. Safe houses, hidden corridors, coded messages, and layers of redundancy ensured that even if one operative failed, the prophecy remained protected. The labyrinth beneath Rome, the hidden archives, and the meticulous record-keeping were not merely storage. They were safeguards, a living architecture designed to counter the unpredictability of human nature. And yet, despite the danger, betrayal also revealed something essential about the power of secrecy. Even when trust was broken, the system endured, strengthened by resilience, foresight, and the relentless vigilance of those who understood the stakes. The prophecy and the Black Pope who protected it survived because the guardianship was more than a hierarchy. It was a culture, a way of life, a philosophy that valued preservation above personal gain. Each failure was a test, each act of treachery a reminder that secrecy was not passive but active, demanding constant attention and adjustment. The figure in the chamber paused, considering the human element. History is often written as a sequence of events, as though nations and kings operate in isolation, responding only to external pressures. Yet here, in the manuscripts and letters, it was clear that human ambition, betrayal, and desire played a central role in shaping outcomes. The prophecy, though powerful, relied on human agents to enact its vision, and human frailty was always a factor. It was a delicate dance, balancing the potential for disaster against the possibility of controlled guidance. A dance performed for centuries with precision, patience, and a constant awareness of risk. In the end, betrayal was never merely a disruption. It was a reminder of the stakes. Each act of treachery threatened not only the individuals involved but the very continuity of the prophecy and the secret architecture of influence that had shaped history. Yet, through vigilance, foresight, and the relentless application of discretion, the Black Pope ensured that even in failure, the greater vision remained intact. The prophecy endured, not because humans were infallible, but because those who guarded it understood the necessity of adapting, correcting, and persevering, no matter the cost. Even the most carefully preserved prophecies contain shadows of uncertainty, glimpses of events that defy expectation and defy human comprehension. In the centuries-old manuscripts, one particular vision stood apart, a vision so enigmatic and unsettling that it had unsettled every Black Pope who came after the first. Unlike other prophecies, which described wars, alliances, and political shifts, this one hinted at a disruption that could unravel the very framework of influence the Jesuits had worked so hard to maintain. It spoke of an unknown force, a variable outside the reach of intelligence, planning, or strategy, something that even the most meticulous guardians could not control. The vision appeared in fragmented passages, scattered across several manuscripts, its language deliberately cryptic. Stars, geometric patterns, and obscure symbols accompanied terse, almost poetic notes. The hand unseen shall falter, and the tower of wisdom shall tremble. A shadow will rise where none is expected, altering the path of kings and the counsel of the faithful. Scholars of the order debated its meaning for decades, each interpretation as plausible as the next, yet none could fully reconcile the implications. The Black Pope recognized that this prophecy represented a turning point, a test of both judgment and endurance for anyone tasked with safeguarding the secret knowledge. The figure in the chamber traced the symbols with their finger, feeling the weight of generations of guardianship pressing upon them. The vision was not merely theoretical. It had already begun to manifest in subtle ways throughout history. Unforeseen rebellions, unexpected alliances, and the sudden rise of individuals who acted outside the influence of the Jesuits hinted at the shadow predicted in the manuscripts. These anomalies, previously dismissed as coincidence or chance, now appeared as deliberate disruptions, a reminder that even the most careful orchestration of events could not account for the unpredictable force of human innovation, courage, or ambition. One example occurred in the early 17th century, when a seemingly minor political figure in the Venetian Republic began acting in ways that defied convention. His decisions, initially inconsequential, gradually shifted the balance of power in the region, challenging alliances carefully cultivated by the order. The Jesuits had monitored him closely, attempting to guide his actions subtly through education, counsel, and influence. Yet, despite their efforts, he moved with a freedom that could not be restrained, a variable outside the network of observation. The Black Pope at the time recognized this as the manifestation of the cryptic vision, a shadow rising unexpectedly, altering the trajectory of events with every step. This unforeseen variable was not a villain, nor was it inherently destructive. Rather, it represented the inherent unpredictability of the human spirit, a force that no prophecy, no matter how carefully crafted, could fully contain. It was a reminder that even centuries of planning, secrecy, and influence were contingent upon factors beyond human control. The manuscripts warned of this disruption, but they offered little guidance on managing it. The Black Pope could only adapt, responding in real time to events that challenged even the most sophisticated strategies. The vision also revealed a moral dimension that had often been overlooked in earlier interpretations of the prophecy. It suggested that power, influence, and knowledge were not solely matters of control, but of ethical responsibility. Those who sought to manipulate history for personal gain would inevitably face consequences, while those who acted with discernment, courage, and foresight could harness the chaos without succumbing to it. In other words, the prophecy was not only a roadmap of events but a test of character, an eternal challenge to the human guardians of forbidden knowledge. The manuscripts hinted at rituals designed to mitigate the impact of the shadow, ceremonies that could realign events or restore balance when anomalies threatened to escalate. These rituals were intricate, demanding both precision and moral clarity, and they were never performed lightly. A single misstep could exacerbate the disruption rather than correct it. The figure in the chamber imagined the Black Popes who had walked these halls centuries ago, carrying out these ceremonies under the dim light of flickering candles, fully aware of the stakes. Each ritual was an act of courage, a confrontation with forces that defied both prediction and control. Despite these precautions, the shadow continued to challenge the order. The rise of unexpected leaders, the eruption of social upheavals, and the appearance of ideas that could not be anticipated all served as reminders that even the most meticulous guardianship could not guarantee absolute control. Yet, paradoxically, these disruptions also tested the ingenuity, foresight, and moral resolve of the Black Popes and their operatives. They forced adaptation, creativity, and an awareness that the prophecy was not static. It was a living framework, responsive to the ebb and flow of human action and history itself. The vision also carried an emotional weight that resonated through generations. It was a reminder that the stakes of secrecy and influence were not abstract. Each failure, each miscalculation, had real consequences for the lives of ordinary people, for the stability of nations, and for the faith of millions. The manuscripts repeatedly emphasized vigilance, humility, and a profound understanding of cause and effect. Power without responsibility was a threat to the very fabric of society. Wisdom without courage was meaningless, and knowledge without discretion could be catastrophic. The shadow, then, was as much a moral test as a practical one, challenging the character of every guardian who sought to preserve the prophecy. As the figure studied the fragmented passages, they felt the weight of centuries pressing down. The shadow, though abstract, was unmistakable. Its presence was a reminder that even the most powerful and secretive orders were vulnerable, that history was never fully predictable, and that even the best-laid plans could be disrupted by forces beyond observation. And yet, this uncertainty was not despairing. It was a call to vigilance, courage, and discernment. The prophecy demanded engagement, attention, and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of balance, even in the face of the unknown. The manuscripts concluded with a haunting phrase, repeated in multiple locations. The unseen hand may falter, but the purpose endures. Those who walk in shadow must remain steadfast, for the light of revelation waits at the journey's end. It was both a warning and a reassurance, a recognition that while disruption was inevitable, the ultimate arc of the prophecy was resilient, protected not merely by secrecy and intelligence, but by the wisdom, courage, and moral integrity of those entrusted with its care. In the quiet of the chamber, the figure understood the enormity of what lay before them. The prophecy was not a static record of events. It was a living challenge, a guide, and a test all at once. To follow it was to navigate centuries of human ambition, deception, courage, and ingenuity. And in that navigation, the shadow would rise, testing the guardians, shaping history, and ultimately reminding all who dared to understand the prophecy that power, knowledge, and influence were never without responsibility, and that even the most carefully orchestrated destiny could bend in ways unforeseen. The mission began in the dead of night, under the muted glow of a crescent moon that hung over Rome like a silent witness. The Black Pope's instructions were clear but cryptic, as always. Retrieve the lost manuscript from the hands of those who had discovered fragments of the prophecy without understanding its true weight. The city slept, unaware of the delicate operation unfolding in its narrow, cobblestone streets, where shadows moved with purpose and intent. The figure now understood that the prophecy was not only preserved through letters, rituals, and influence. It was also defended through action, courage, and the willingness to confront danger directly. The streets were eerily silent, the distant clatter of a carriage the only sound breaking the night's stillness. The figure moved with practiced precision, guided by the network of secret pathways that wound beneath the city and above it, invisible to all but those trained in their use. Each alley, hidden courtyard, and abandoned stairwell had been mapped meticulously over generations, serving as arteries through which knowledge, messages, and operatives flowed without detection. Tonight, these pathways were essential, for the lives of the operatives, and the integrity of the prophecy depended on speed, stealth, and secrecy. The target was a small, nondescript villa on the outskirts of the city, its facade betraying nothing of the treasures hidden within. Inside, scholars and collectors had gathered fragments of the prophecy, drawn by curiosity or ambition, unaware of the dangers they courted. The Black Pope had learned of their discovery through intelligence reports, coded letters intercepted in Florence, whispers traced back to Venice, and subtle inquiries made by Jesuit operatives. The risk was clear. If the manuscripts were misused, the delicate balance of influence painstakingly maintained for centuries could be disrupted. The mission was not merely retrieval, it was containment, correction, and, if necessary, elimination of threat. The figure approached the villa cautiously, noting the flicker of candlelight through narrow windows. Guards were posted, though they were few and untrained, suggesting that the occupants underestimated the importance of their prize. Inside, the manuscripts were arranged carelessly on a table, illuminated by a single oil lamp. Their presence seemed almost out of place, ancient and fragile amidst the clutter of mundane objects. The figure's heart quickened as they moved closer, aware that each step carried both risk and responsibility. One misstep, one alarm, could provoke confrontation, and the stakes were impossibly high. Entering the villa required both patience and precision. Lock mechanisms were bypassed with subtle tools. Doors opened quietly without the hint of sound. Each movement was deliberate, a choreography perfected over years of training and experience. The figure's mind remained focused, aware that this was more than a mission. It was a test of skill, judgment, and composure. They retrieved the manuscripts carefully, feeling the weight of centuries of knowledge in their hands. Each page represented not just history, but responsibility, danger, and the power to shape destinies. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked, and a figure emerged from the shadows. One of the villa's inhabitants, startled and alarmed. Time seemed to slow. The intruder's eyes widened as they recognized the operative before them, though not fully understanding the authority behind their presence. Words could not be risked. A subtle gesture, a commandless warning, froze the intruder in place. The training and discipline instilled by the Jesuits now proved invaluable. Human curiosity and fear could be managed, guided, or neutralized with subtlety, and the mission's success depended on such mastery. The manuscripts were secured in a protective case, and the operative retraced their steps through the labyrinthine streets and secret corridors of Rome. Each twist, turn, and shadowed passage served as both protection and challenge. The city above remained oblivious, its citizens dreaming under the moonlight, unaware that history itself had been preserved, that the delicate threads of prophecy and influence had been safeguarded from the unpredictable forces of ambition and ignorance. Every heartbeat, every silent footstep, was a reminder of the human vulnerability at the center of this centuries-spanning story. Once the manuscripts were delivered to the hidden archives beneath the city, the operative reflected on the enormity of the task completed. The risk had been immense, yet it was necessary, for even the most abstract threat to the prophecy required action. The Black Pope had always known that influence alone could not protect knowledge. Guardianship demanded courage, intervention, and, at times, confrontation. The mission underscored the delicate balance between discretion and action, showing that even centuries of careful planning could not eliminate the need for decisive, human engagement. The retrieval also highlighted the persistent danger posed by those who sought knowledge without understanding its implications. Ambition, curiosity, and human frailty had brought them to the edge of disaster, and yet the operative's skill, training, and courage had restored order. The event was a microcosm of the larger struggle. The Black Pope, the Jesuits, and their operatives were engaged in an eternal dance with chaos, unpredictability, and the shadow within the prophecy. Their actions were not merely protective, they were corrective, ensuring that history remained on the path the prophecy had foretold. And yet, even in success, uncertainty remained. The manuscripts were safe, but the shadow, the unforeseen variable in the prophecy, was still present, still influencing events in ways impossible to predict. The mission was a victory, but it was not final. History, shaped by ambition, curiosity, and human unpredictability, continued to unfold. The Black Pope and his operatives could guide, intervene, and correct, but they could not fully control the complex web of events that stretched across nations, centuries, and human hearts. The prophecy was resilient, but it demanded vigilance, courage, and an unflinching awareness of the forces, both human and unseen, that shaped the world. As the night deepened, the operative emerged from the labyrinth beneath Rome, the city sleeping peacefully above. The weight of the mission, the manuscripts, and the centuries of guardianship pressed upon them, a silent reminder that the prophecy was both a privilege and a burden. In their hands lay the culmination of strategy, secrecy, and moral responsibility, and in that moment, they understood that the preservation of knowledge required not just intellect, but action, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the unseen currents of history. The aftermath of the mission was quieter than the night itself, but the echoes of its consequences stretched far beyond the secret corridors of Rome. The manuscripts had been returned to their hidden archives, yet the act of retrieving them had not gone unnoticed. In distant courts and shadowed chambers, whispers of missing texts, of unknown forces moving unseen, began to circulate. Those who had once sought the prophecy, motivated by ambition or curiosity, now found themselves watched, their movements subtly constrained by a network of observation they barely understood. The Black Pope had anticipated these reactions. Every action, every ripple of consequence, had been considered and mitigated, but the human element always remained unpredictable. Within the hidden archives beneath the city, the manuscripts were carefully restored to their protective casings. Each page was examined under the soft glow of candlelight, its words and symbols scrutinized for any hint of tampering or damage. The operative who had returned them remained vigilant, aware that the mission's success was only the first step in a longer process of ensuring the prophecy's continuity. The Jesuits had always understood that knowledge, no matter how carefully guarded, was vulnerable to human error, interpretation, and greed. To preserve it required more than hiding. It demanded constant vigilance, analysis, and adaptation. The Black Pope convened a council of senior Jesuits shortly thereafter, a gathering shrouded in both secrecy and solemnity. The chamber was heavy with the scent of parchment and candle wax, a tangible reminder of centuries of custodianship. Each member understood the stakes. The manuscripts contained not only prophecy but strategy, moral guidance, and the subtle frameworks through which the order had shaped the course of nations. The recent breach highlighted vulnerabilities, and the Council's task was to assess, adapt, and strengthen the network to ensure that the shadow, the unforeseen variable foretold in the prophecy, could not exploit these weaknesses. Debates were intense yet disciplined. Some argued for tighter restrictions, proposing new protocols, encrypted communications, and increased surveillance. Others cautioned against overreaction, warning that excessive control could stifle the creativity, judgment, and initiative necessary to navigate the complex currents of history. The Black Pope listened patiently, weighing every argument, aware that a balance must be maintained between control and freedom. The prophecy demanded guardianship, yes, but it also required adaptability, discernment, and the capacity to respond to events that could not be anticipated. One Jesuit spoke of the human element, reminding the Council that ambition, curiosity, and moral weakness were constants that could never be fully eliminated. The breach in Venice, the discovery of the manuscripts by untrained scholars, and the subtle disruptions observed in Paris and Florence were all examples of how even minor acts could trigger unforeseen consequences. It was a sobering reminder that history, while guided, was not entirely controllable. The shadow continued to rise in ways that challenged the order's foresight, demanding vigilance, courage, and flexibility. The Council also addressed the manuscripts themselves. Some argued for tighter concealment, sealing the texts in ways that would prevent any further access. Others advocated for selective dissemination, allowing only a few trusted operatives to study fragments of the prophecy under strict supervision. The Black Pope ultimately decreed a combination of both strategies. The most sensitive passages would remain hidden in the archives, accessible only under the most controlled circumstances, while less critical sections could be studied to train new generations of Jesuits in the principles, strategies, and moral responsibilities required to protect the prophecy. Even as the Council deliberated, the figure in the archives reflected on the personal cost of guardianship. The mission had demanded courage, precision, and unwavering composure under extreme pressure. The knowledge they protected was both a gift and a burden, a responsibility that could never be shared lightly. To safeguard the prophecy was to live constantly in shadow, to act with discretion, and to confront dangers that ordinary people could never imagine. The weight of centuries rested on their shoulders, a burden compounded by the knowledge that the shadow, unpredictable, elusive, and morally ambiguous, would always test them, no matter how careful or disciplined they were. The aftermath also carried moral lessons. The manuscripts, while dangerous, were not inherently malevolent. Their power lay in how they were interpreted and applied. Ambition without wisdom, curiosity without discretion, and courage without foresight could all transform knowledge into catastrophe. The Black Pope emphasized that guardianship was not merely about control, but about cultivating understanding, responsibility, and ethical judgment. The shadow in the prophecy was a reminder that knowledge carried consequences, and that the true test of power was the ability to wield it without succumbing to human weakness. Outside the archives, the world moved on, unaware of the events that had transpired beneath its streets. In the courts of Europe, minor shifts occurred as planned. Alliances solidified, rebellions subsided, and political calculations unfolded according to the subtle guidance of the order. Yet in these victories, there was always tension, the knowledge that any misstep, however small, could unravel carefully laid plans. The operative who had returned the manuscripts knew that vigilance could never end, that every success was temporary, and that the shadow remained, waiting for moments of human error to reemerge. The figure also reflected on the psychological weight of their role. Guardianship demanded not only skill but restraint. The temptation to reveal secrets, to influence openly, or to assert control over events was constant. Each decision required balancing immediate outcomes against long-term preservation of the prophecy. The Black Pope and his operatives had mastered this balance over centuries, yet every generation faced the same test. Could they act with intelligence, courage, and morality under the pressure of human ambition and the unpredictability of the shadow? Ultimately, the mission's success and its aftermath reinforced a central truth. The prophecy, the manuscripts, and the Black Pope's guardianship were part of a living system, resilient yet vulnerable, structured yet adaptive. Every event, every disruption, and every human choice contributed to a dynamic equilibrium in which history was guided but never fully controlled. The operative understood that their role was both critical and temporary. They were a link in a chain stretching across centuries, entrusted with the responsibility of protecting knowledge that could shape destinies. As dawn broke over Rome, the first light filtered through the narrow windows of the archives, illuminating the manuscripts in a soft glow. The city awoke, oblivious to the events that had transpired beneath its streets, and the figure stood in silent reflection. The prophecy endured, the shadow remained, and the delicate balance between secrecy, influence, and morality had been preserved, at least for now. The mission had been a success, but it was only a single chapter in a centuries-long story, a story that demanded courage, discretion, and vigilance from every guardian willing to walk in the shadows of history. The revelation arrived unexpectedly, buried within a set of manuscripts that had long been considered minor, almost inconsequential. Yet as the figure in the chamber studied them under the flickering candlelight, it became clear that these texts contained a secret far greater than anything previously uncovered. Symbols that had been dismissed as decorative, diagrams assumed to be abstract, and marginal notes written in nearly illegible script all coalesced into a pattern that pointed toward an event, a convergence, and a truth so profound that it could shift the understanding of history itself. The Black Pope's vigilance, the Jesuits' centuries of guidance, and the hidden influence exerted across nations were all connected to this singular, extraordinary revelation. The manuscripts described a time when the shadow, the unforeseen variable that had haunted prophecies for centuries, would rise in unprecedented magnitude. Unlike previous manifestations, which had been subtle and contained, this event promised a level of disruption that could touch multiple kingdoms simultaneously, altering alliances, political orders, and religious influence. The language was enigmatic yet precise, referencing celestial alignments, sudden changes in leadership, and the emergence of individuals whose actions could not be predicted, even by the most skilled guardians. The figure understood, with a chill that ran down their spine, that this was not merely prophecy. It was a warning, a guide, and a challenge all at once. What made the revelation truly shocking was its specificity. For the first time, the prophecy named places, approximate timelines, and the roles of certain actors, though always cloaked in symbolic and allegorical language. It was as if the manuscripts were whispering directly to those capable of deciphering them, saying, "Prepare, watch, intervene only where necessary." The balance depends on subtlety, foresight, and the courage to act in darkness. The figure felt the gravity of responsibility weigh heavily upon them. To misinterpret even a single symbol or misjudge the timing could result in consequences so profound that the meticulous efforts of centuries might unravel in a single moment. This revelation also hinted at a hidden adversary, a force working in parallel with the shadow yet distinct in its purpose. Unlike human ambition or folly, this adversary was methodical, aware, and seemingly omniscient, capable of anticipating the order's interventions before they were enacted. Some scholars within the manuscripts speculated that this adversary represented a faction within the Church itself, one that had splintered long ago and now sought to challenge the authority of the Black Pope. Others suggested it might be a symbolic embodiment of chaos, destiny, or divine testing, a force that human agents could recognize but never fully comprehend. The uncertainty of its nature only amplified the danger, leaving the guardians with the dual task of preparation and interpretation. The figure turned pages carefully, absorbing references to historical events that had previously seemed isolated or mysterious. Battles, uprisings, and political shifts were revealed to be interconnected, orchestrated in ways that were invisible to contemporary observers but unmistakable in hindsight. A rebellion in Florence, a succession crisis in Spain, and a sudden treaty in France. All were described not as separate occurrences but as part of a pattern aligned with the rising shadow. The manuscripts implied that the same mechanism of influence that had guided events for centuries could either mitigate the disruption or be overwhelmed by it if guardians misjudged the timing or intervention required. A particularly chilling passage described the potential consequences of failure. The prophecy warned that if the rising shadow was not managed with precision, the resulting chaos could extend beyond political and social upheaval. It spoke of spiritual crises, of faith tested and shaken, of communities divided and leaders lost to despair. The manuscripts suggested that entire populations could be influenced by the ripple effects of a single miscalculated action, demonstrating the interconnectedness of destiny and human behavior. The Black Pope's role, and by extension the role of those entrusted with the prophecy, was not merely administrative or protective, it was existential. The balance of faith, governance, and morality could pivot on the decisions made by a few invisible hands. The figure paused, reflecting on the centuries of guardianship that had led to this moment. Each Black Pope, each Jesuit operative, had acted in accordance with the prophecy, correcting, guiding, and intervening to prevent the shadow from overwhelming human events. Yet the revelation in these manuscripts suggested that the coming event would surpass all previous challenges. It demanded a level of foresight, adaptability, and courage that had never before been required. It was a call to action, a test of skill and moral integrity that transcended generations, linking the past, present, and future in a delicate, precarious balance. The chamber itself seemed to respond to the revelation, the shadows deepening as though emphasizing the gravity of the discovery. The manuscripts radiated a silent authority, as if aware of the human presence reading them. The figure felt both awe and fear, a profound recognition that knowledge, no matter how carefully guarded, could carry consequences beyond imagination. Each symbol, each line of text, was a reminder that history was not merely a series of events but a living structure, maintained by the vigilance, intelligence, and moral clarity of those who understood its hidden architecture. And yet there was hope. The manuscripts were not merely warnings, they contained guidance. Embedded within the cryptic notes and diagrams were strategies, subtle interventions, and methods of preparation that could allow the guardians to manage the rising shadow without causing catastrophic disruption. Success would require patience, discretion, and coordination across multiple regions, but it was possible. The prophecy had always been both a challenge and a guide. The revelations in these manuscripts reaffirmed that balance could be maintained if the lessons of history were heeded, and if the courage to act decisively in the shadows was embraced. As the figure traced a final symbol on the last page, they understood the enormity of the task ahead. The rising shadow was no longer a distant possibility. It was imminent, its influence creeping into multiple realms simultaneously. The revelation had illuminated the path forward, yet it had also cast a long, foreboding shadow over the centuries of guardianship. Every action taken in the coming months and years would be critical. Every decision, subtle or overt, could determine whether history remained guided or spiraled into unforeseen chaos. In that moment, the figure felt a profound connection to every Black Pope who had come before, every Jesuit who had acted in darkness, and every human life influenced, guided, or protected by the prophecy. The manuscripts were more than records. They were a living continuum of knowledge, responsibility, and moral judgment. And as the first light of dawn filtered through the chamber, illuminating the ancient symbols in a soft, almost sacred glow, the figure understood that the coming revelation was not merely a threat. It was a call to vigilance, courage, and an unwavering commitment to preserving the delicate balance that had defined history for centuries. The first intervention had to be precise, executed with the stealth and subtlety that had defined the guardianship of the prophecy for centuries. The rising shadow, now no longer theoretical, had begun to manifest in ways both subtle and alarming. Across the European courts, whispers of rebellion, sudden shifts in alliances, and the unexplained rise of unpredictable actors hinted at the shadow's influence. To act prematurely risked exposure. To delay was equally dangerous. The Black Pope had prepared for this moment through meticulous planning, and the operative chosen to implement the intervention understood the stakes with absolute clarity. The balance of power, the safety of countless lives, and the integrity of the prophecy itself rested on their actions. The mission was set in Venice, a city of canals, bridges, and labyrinthine alleys, where the slightest misstep could betray intentions. The target was not a person, but a moment, a critical convergence of influence that, if left unchecked, could accelerate the shadow's disruption. A political assembly had been scheduled, bringing together nobles whose loyalties were precarious, and whose decisions could tip the balance of power in unforeseen ways. The Jesuits had long observed the assembly, tracing the lineage, ambitions, and interpersonal dynamics of each participant. Every detail, from seating arrangements to ceremonial rituals, was accounted for in preparation for this delicate intervention. The operative arrived days in advance, blending seamlessly with the city's populace. Peddlers, scholars, and minor officials passed them daily without suspicion, unaware that history itself was being monitored from within their midst. The operatives studied the subtle behaviors of the nobles, their gestures, the flicker of recognition in their eyes, and the whispered exchanges behind closed doors. Every interaction, every micro-expression, was data, feeding into the operative's understanding of how the shadow might exploit human weakness and ambition. By the night of the assembly, the operative possessed a map of influence so detailed that it rivaled the diagrams preserved in the ancient manuscripts. The intervention required both courage and precision. A subtle misplacement of a document, a whispered suggestion to the right noble at the right moment, and a carefully timed delay in communication were all orchestrated to guide decisions without detection. The operative's hand trembled only slightly as they enacted the plan, aware that exposure could provoke not only personal danger but a disruption that would cascade far beyond Venice. Each step, though seemingly minor, was weighted with consequences. It was a delicate choreography, one that had been honed by centuries of guardianship, yet made terrifying by the unpredictability of human nature. The assembly unfolded under the watchful eyes of those unaware that their actions were being guided. Noblemen gestured with confidence, unaware of the invisible hand shaping their decisions, while others hesitated, influenced subtly by the operative's interventions. A document placed incorrectly on a desk, a phrase carefully emphasized in conversation, and a delayed response to an inquiry all contributed to shifting the course of discussion. By the end of the night, the assembly concluded without incident, the potential for disruption mitigated by actions invisible to anyone present. Venice remained outwardly unchanged, yet the balance had been preserved, the shadow temporarily held at bay. Yet even in success there was tension. The operative understood that the shadow was not a single entity but a dynamic force, capable of manifesting in multiple forms simultaneously. While the immediate danger had been contained, other events across Europe hinted at further disruptions. A sudden quarrel in Florence, a minor rebellion in the north of Spain, and an unexpected treaty in France. The intervention in Venice was but the first in a series of necessary actions to preserve stability, each requiring the same precision, courage, and discretion. The operative returned to their lodgings, aware that vigilance could not end, that history itself demanded constant attention and intervention. The moral complexity of the mission weighed heavily on the operative. Every action, no matter how subtle, involved manipulation, deception, and the exertion of influence over decisions that might have otherwise unfolded naturally. The manuscripts had long warned that guardianship was not merely a matter of observation. It required active participation in shaping events, often in morally ambiguous ways. The operative understood that the ends, preserving balance, preventing chaos, and safeguarding the prophecy, justified the careful orchestration of human behavior, yet the ethical burden was profound. Each decision carried the weight of countless lives, futures, and the unseen currents of history itself. Back in Rome, the Black Pope received reports from Venice with a mixture of relief and anticipation. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the rising shadow remained, unpredictable and persistent. The manuscript's guidance was invaluable, but they could not anticipate every nuance of human behavior, nor could they predict the ways in which the shadow might manifest next. The Black Pope understood that this was the first true test of the new era, the emergence of disruptions so subtle, yet so powerful, that only vigilance, adaptability, and the courage to act in darkness could contain them. The intervention also revealed the enduring effectiveness of centuries of preparation. Every secret pathway, every coded signal, and every prior lesson in subtle influence was essential. The Jesuits' methods, honed through decades of study and practice, proved capable of mitigating even the most insidious disruptions. Yet the operative knew that history was not static. It was dynamic, fluid, and influenced by countless variables beyond the control of any single order or individual. The shadow would rise again, in ways unforeseen, and each guardian would be tested anew. As dawn broke over Venice, the operative reflected on the nature of guardianship. The mission had succeeded, yet it was a reminder that success was temporary and fragile. The shadow was not defeated, it was contained for a moment, guided back into channels where it could be managed without catastrophic disruption. The manuscripts, the prophecy, and the centuries of secret influence remained intact, yet the future was still uncertain, shaped by both human decisions and forces beyond comprehension. The operative understood that the balance of history was fragile, sustained by courage, intelligence, and the willingness to act invisibly in the shadows. Finally, the operative considered the human element once more. The shadow was not simply a force of chaos. It was a reflection of ambition, curiosity, and the unpredictable nature of human choice. Each intervention required understanding not just the mechanics of influence, but the psychology, motives, and desires of those involved. Guardianship was as much about insight into the human soul as it was about knowledge, strategy, and prophecy. The Venetian mission had succeeded not because of force or dominance, but because it had respected, anticipated, and subtly guided the intricate web of human behavior, allowing history to continue on a path aligned with the prophecy. The aftermath of Venice brought little comfort, for even the most carefully executed interventions could not predict every consequence. The shadow, subtle yet insistent, had been contained for a moment, but its presence remained, like a low hum beneath the symphony of history. Reports trickled in from distant cities, each hinting at disruptions that had yet to manifest fully. A minor rebellion in a Spanish province, an unplanned alliance forming in Florence, and rumors of a secretive faction gaining influence in northern France. The Black Pope and his council understood that the first intervention, though successful, was only a prelude to the challenges that lay ahead. History was a living entity, and the rising shadow was its unpredictable pulse. The Jesuits convened once more, this time in a chamber deep beneath the Vatican, where the walls themselves seemed to bear witness to centuries of secrecy. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of responsibility. The Black Pope spoke first, his voice low and measured, reminding the council that guardianship was not a static task. "We act not for glory, nor for recognition," he said, "but because the threads of destiny demand our care. Each intervention is temporary, each decision fragile, and each consequence far-reaching." The members nodded, acutely aware that even the slightest miscalculation could ripple across nations, altering the balance the prophecy had maintained for centuries. New intelligence had arrived, revealing a threat within the order itself. A trusted Jesuit, long stationed in France, had begun to question the authority of the Black Pope, interpreting the prophecy in ways that diverged from centuries of guidance. While not overtly hostile, this divergence introduced risk. A single misjudgment, amplified by ambition or moral certainty, could catalyze the shadow into chaos. The manuscripts had warned of internal fractures, subtle challenges from within, yet seeing it unfold in real time brought the council a chilling awareness of human fallibility. Trust, they realized, was both essential and perilous. The very individuals trained to preserve secrecy could also become the instruments of disruption. The chamber buzzed with debate. Some advocated swift action. Recall the Jesuit in question, isolate them, or subtly realign their loyalties. Others counseled patience, noting that overt interference could create suspicion, revealing the existence of the prophecy itself to those who should never know. The Black Pope listened, weighing each perspective, understanding that the intervention required both moral and strategic acumen. To act too forcefully risked exposure. To act too passively risked letting the shadow propagate. The solution lay in a balance, one that demanded subtlety, discretion, and the precise orchestration of human behavior. Meanwhile, the figure in Venice returned to Rome, carrying reports of their success but also notes on subtle anomalies observed during the mission. Certain nobles had acted unpredictably, their decisions diverging from the anticipated course by degrees so small they were almost imperceptible, but enough to suggest the shadow's influence extended further than previously understood. The operative traced these divergences in meticulous diagrams, connecting minor actions to broader historical trends. It became evident that the rising shadow was adaptive, able to exploit even the smallest lapse in guidance, testing the order's vigilance, strategy, and understanding of human nature. Unexpected consequences emerged quickly. A minor financial dispute in Florence, previously deemed inconsequential, escalated as merchants and minor officials made choices influenced by unseen pressures. In Spain, a disputed succession prompted a regional power struggle that, while contained, revealed cracks in the centuries-long network of influence. Even in Rome, subtle murmurs among clergy hinted at the internal tension caused by the divergence of interpretation from the French Jesuit. The shadow, it seemed, thrived on complexity and multiplicity, exploiting human ambition, miscommunication, and impatience to spread its influence quietly, invisibly, but with profound effect. The Black Pope's strategy shifted, incorporating both containment and correction. Each deviation, no matter how minor, was addressed with precision. Letters redirected, instructions subtly altered, and key individuals guided without their awareness. The manuscripts served as both blueprint and warning, but human discernment remained essential. The shadow could not be measured by intelligence alone. It required moral clarity, patience, and courage in the face of uncertainty. Every intervention was a test, every choice a balance between preserving secrecy and maintaining the trajectory of events foretold by the prophecy. Yet amidst these challenges, a revelation emerged. The shadow was not inherently destructive. Its influence was unpredictable, but it revealed the resilience, ingenuity, and moral discernment of those who navigated it successfully. The Jesuits realized that disruption could serve as both test and catalyst, highlighting weaknesses in the network while simultaneously offering opportunities to strengthen it. Each unexpected consequence, each divergence from anticipated outcomes, became a lesson, an opportunity to refine strategies, adapt interventions, and reaffirm the order's commitment to safeguarding the prophecy. Even so, the human cost weighed heavily. Operatives worked tirelessly in the shadows, guided by centuries of training and the weight of moral responsibility. Each decision, each subtle manipulation involved risks, not only to the mission but to lives and reputations. The manuscripts emphasized that knowledge carried consequences, and every guardian felt the gravity of that truth. Success was fragile, temporary, and dependent on both foresight and human restraint. A single lapse could cascade across generations, unraveling the careful orchestration of history. The council recognized a critical truth. The shadow was a force intertwined with human nature, emerging wherever ambition, curiosity, and moral uncertainty intersected. It could not be eliminated, it could only be understood, managed, and guided. The French Jesuit, once a potential source of disruption, became a focal point for subtle correction, an opportunity to demonstrate patience, persuasion, and moral influence rather than coercion. This approach reflected centuries of wisdom embedded in the manuscripts. Human behavior was both the instrument and the challenge of prophecy, and only through careful, disciplined guidance could the balance be maintained. By nightfall, the council concluded its deliberations, setting forth a plan to monitor, correct, and guide the shadow across multiple regions. The Black Pope emphasized patience, vigilance, and subtlety, underscoring that each intervention must be measured, deliberate, and ethically sound. The manuscripts provided insight, but human judgment remained paramount. The shadow would rise, test, and challenge, yet the order had endured centuries precisely because its guardians understood the interplay between knowledge, morality, and human unpredictability. As dawn broke over Rome, the figure reflected on the delicate dance that defined their existence. The first interventions had succeeded, but the shadow remained, persistent and adaptive. Unexpected consequences revealed both the fragility and resilience of history, and the necessity of balancing influence with discretion. The prophecy endured, guided by human judgment, moral clarity, and the unwavering vigilance of those willing to act in darkness. The Black Pope's guardianship was not static. It was living, dynamic, and continuously tested by the unpredictability of the human heart. The first true confrontation arrived not with fanfare, but with the subtle tremor of events cascading across multiple courts simultaneously. The shadow, having exploited the French Jesuits' divergence, now began to manifest in ways that were impossible to ignore. Minor rebellions erupted in northern Italy, previously contained disputes flared into regional crises, and in Spain, tensions between rival noble houses escalated beyond expectation. It was no longer a question of subtle interventions or redirections. The shadow had grown bold, adaptive, and unpredictable. The Black Pope understood that the order now faced its first direct test against the full force of the rising darkness, a confrontation that would demand every ounce of strategy, courage, and moral clarity available. The operative dispatched from Venice arrived in Florence under cover of night, navigating narrow streets and shadowed alleys with the precision of a practiced guardian. Each step was calculated, every movement observed by agents aligned with the order yet unknown to the public. The operative's task was to prevent the rebellion from spiraling, to counteract the influence of the shadow's subtle manipulations, and to safeguard lives while maintaining the secrecy of the prophecy. The city itself seemed alive with tension, every whispered conversation, every hurried gesture, and every glance in the dark carrying potential consequences that could tip the fragile balance of history. The heart of the challenge lay in understanding the interplay between human ambition and the shadow's influence. Local leaders, fueled by personal grievances and aspirations, were unknowingly guided by forces they could not see. The operative traced these threads carefully, predicting where missteps might occur and intervening with imperceptible nudges. A strategically placed message, the timing of a messenger's arrival, a subtle suggestion in conversation. Each action was designed to steer events back toward equilibrium without revealing the invisible hand guiding them. Yet despite careful planning, unpredictability remained a constant companion, a reminder that even centuries of guardianship could not fully control human will. The Black Pope, monitoring the unfolding events from the Vatican, coordinated responses with the precision of a conductor orchestrating a symphony of unseen forces. Reports arrived from multiple regions, each requiring analysis, judgment, and strategic intervention. Minor skirmishes in the north were contained through local intermediaries. Disputes between rival factions in Florence were subtly redirected, and diplomatic messages in Spain were timed to diffuse tensions. It was a delicate balance, where one miscalculation could amplify the shadow's influence rather than diminish it. The Black Pope and his council understood that this confrontation was not merely a physical or political struggle. It was a battle of insight, patience, and moral foresight. Amidst this chaos, the operative observed an unexpected variable. Ordinary citizens, unaware of the shadow's manipulations or the interventions of the order, began to act in ways that either mitigated or amplified the crises. A baker in Florence calmed a nervous crowd with a simple act of kindness. A minor clerk in Spain delayed a message that could have inflamed tensions. These unplanned actions became critical variables in the operative's calculations, illustrating a profound truth embedded within the manuscripts. History is a living tapestry, shaped not only by power and prophecy but by the innumerable choices of ordinary people. The shadow was adaptive, but so too were human hearts, capable of altering outcomes through courage, empathy, or chance. The confrontation escalated further when a key noble, influenced partially by the French Jesuits' earlier deviations, challenged the operative's subtle interventions. This was a test not merely of strategy, but of perception and composure. The operative had to act decisively without revealing the nature of the prophecy, employing tact, subtle persuasion, and calculated influence to prevent escalation. Every conversation, gesture, and written communication became a tool in this invisible battle. Success relied not on force but on insight, predicting human behavior, understanding the interplay of ambition and fear, and guiding outcomes without overt interference. Meanwhile, the Black Pope prepared contingency plans, anticipating that the shadow's influence might extend beyond immediate regions. Historical analysis, cross-referencing past interventions and manuscripts, revealed patterns in the shadow's behavior. It exploited hesitation, amplified miscommunication, and thrived on moral uncertainty. Understanding these tendencies allowed the order to anticipate potential crises, creating interventions designed to counteract the most dangerous consequences before they fully emerged. Yet the unpredictable human element remained. A single act of courage, folly, or defiance could alter even the most meticulous plans. In Florence, the operative implemented the final phase of the intervention. During a clandestine night meeting with key figures, subtle hints were introduced, guiding decisions toward compromise without revealing the underlying truth. A miscommunication was corrected through a careful redirection of correspondence, preventing a conflict that could have escalated into civil unrest. Minor skirmishes were de-escalated with a combination of diplomacy and timing, and alliances that had begun to fracture were reinforced through quiet persuasion. By the early hours of dawn, the immediate crisis had been contained, though the operative knew this was merely a temporary reprieve. The shadow, adaptive and patient, would rise again, testing both strategy and morality. The moral and emotional stakes of the confrontation were profound. Every choice, every subtle act of influence, carried consequences for countless lives. The operative felt the weight of history in each decision, the knowledge that success meant guiding events invisibly, while failure could ignite chaos beyond control. The manuscripts emphasized that guardianship was not a position of power, but a responsibility of conscience. History could not be controlled with force alone. It demanded insight, courage, and unwavering ethical judgment. The shadow was a mirror of human ambition and uncertainty, and the confrontation revealed the thin lines separating guidance from manipulation. By the time the operative returned to Rome, the Black Pope and Council reviewed the outcomes in meticulous detail. Reports indicated that while immediate crises had been mitigated, subtle disruptions remained in distant regions, influenced by the shadow and lingering deviations from the French Jesuits' prior actions. The confrontation had tested the order's capacity to act decisively in darkness, to maintain balance while navigating uncertainty, and to guide history without revealing the invisible hands shaping it. It was a victory, tempered by the sobering realization that the rising shadow was not a single, contained force. It was a living, adaptive presence, interacting with human ambition, morality, and unpredictability in ways that would continue to challenge the guardianship of prophecy. As dawn broke over Rome, the Black Pope and operative reflected on the confrontation. The rising shadow had revealed the limits of prediction, the moral weight of influence, and the resilience required to maintain centuries of hidden guidance. History, fragile and dynamic, demanded vigilance, patience, and ethical discernment. The manuscripts endured, the prophecy remained intact, yet the human element, the courage, folly, and insight of both guardians and ordinary citizens, proved to be the most unpredictable and critical variable of all. The confrontation had been survived, but the order understood that the shadow would rise again, its influence shaping events across nations, compelling the guardians to act with ever greater wisdom, subtlety, and moral clarity. Every subtle interaction, every decision made by nobles, merchants, and clergy was scrutinized, patterns traced, and anomalies catalogued. The shadow's influence was everywhere yet nowhere identifiable, shaping events invisibly, nudging human choices, and testing the resilience, strategy, and moral judgment of the order. Even the smallest deviation, an overlooked gesture, a delayed message, could reveal insights into the shadow's methodology and allow for subtle course corrections in the unfolding battle to preserve equilibrium. During this period, a series of unexpected alliances emerged, seemingly spontaneous yet bearing the signature of the shadow's influence. Leaders with no prior connections found themselves aligned, their decisions suddenly converging toward outcomes that destabilized long-standing balances of power. The operative mapped these convergences meticulously, realizing that each alignment, while appearing fortuitous, had been orchestrated to challenge the order's ability to guide events subtly without detection. The intelligence gathered would be vital for predicting the shadow's next moves, but it also emphasized the adaptive, almost sentient nature of the force they faced. The emotional toll of this revelation was profound. The order had long understood the moral and strategic demands of guardianship, but now they faced an adversary whose intelligence transcended ordinary human comprehension. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the consequences of failure could ripple across generations. The Black Pope, the operative, and the council grappled with a paradox: to act decisively without exposure, to guide events without revealing knowledge, and to counter an intelligence that could anticipate interventions, all while preserving moral integrity and protecting human lives. The operative, in quiet moments beneath the shadowed corridors of Venice, reflected on the scale of the challenge. The shadow had evolved, testing not only strategy and foresight but the very essence of moral courage. Each intervention was a trial, each choice a balancing act between guiding history and preserving the freedom of those influenced by it. The manuscripts, once regarded as predictive and advisory, now revealed themselves as living instruments, interacting with the intelligence of the shadow and the moral decisions of the order to create a complex, evolving tapestry of cause and effect. By dawn, the council reconvened, the weight of revelation settling over the chamber. The operative presented their findings, tracing the patterns of influence, deviation, and adaptation observed over the past months. The Black Pope listened, absorbed every detail, and began to formulate a new strategy, one that acknowledged the shadow's intelligence, anticipated its adaptive moves, and preserved the subtle, moral, and ethical approach that had guided the order for centuries. The confrontation had revealed the true scale of the threat, a force as patient as it was intelligent, as adaptive as it was invisible, and as entwined with human ambition and choice as the prophecy itself. The revelation marked a turning point. The order now understood that the rising shadow was not merely a test of intervention, but a test of understanding, patience, and moral discernment. Every success, every containment, every subtle nudge of history was part of an ongoing dialogue with a force that transcended ordinary human comprehension. The operative realized that the coming months would demand not only strategic brilliance but profound ethical clarity, courage in darkness, and the willingness to act invisibly in a world that could not perceive the battles being fought in shadows. The first direct clash arrived not as an earthquake or a declaration of war, but as a ripple across multiple regions simultaneously, an orchestrated series of crises designed to test the order's capacity to respond, adapt, and preserve the delicate equilibrium of history. In northern Italy, a minor rebellion flared into open conflict, fueled by grievances both real and manipulated by the shadow's invisible hand. In Spain, rival noble factions, previously constrained by subtle diplomacy, found themselves propelled toward confrontation by unexpected provocations. Even in France, where alliances had seemed stable, the emergence of clandestine networks introduced instability so carefully engineered that it appeared spontaneous, natural, almost inevitable. The Black Pope convened the council immediately, sensing the pattern that connected these crises. The shadow, he intoned, his voice steady yet carrying the weight of centuries, has chosen to challenge us not with a single threat, but with coordinated, simultaneous pressure. Its purpose is clear: to test our ability to act decisively, ethically, and invisibly across multiple arenas at once. The operative, already deployed in Florence, listened as the council outlined priorities, contingencies, and intervention strategies. The challenge was unprecedented. Never before had the shadow coordinated its influence with such apparent intelligence and reach. In Florence, the operative moved with deliberate caution through the city, observing the growing unrest. Citizens, unaware of the invisible forces manipulating their environment, reacted to uncertainty with a mixture of fear, hope, and curiosity. Markets became crowded, conversations laced with tension, and rumors spread like wildfire, each small action a potential catalyst for escalation. The operative had to act not with force but with influence. Subtle interventions that redirected decisions, reassured key actors, and nudged events back toward stability without revealing the invisible hand guiding them. Every gesture, every word, every misdirection had to be precise, for even a minor miscalculation could amplify the chaos. Meanwhile, reports from Spain and France confirmed that the shadow's influence was both strategic and adaptive. Minor provocations escalated disproportionately, alliances shifted unpredictably, and key figures made decisions that aligned with the shadow's objectives rather than their own best interests. It was clear that this was not random chaos. The shadow was intelligent, learning, and testing the order's capacity to respond. Every action taken by the operatives, every subtle intervention orchestrated by the Black Pope, was observed, anticipated, and countered in ways so subtle that only careful analysis could reveal the underlying pattern. The operative in Florence faced their own crisis. A key noble, swayed by rumors and orchestrated provocations, challenged a delicate agreement previously secured through months of subtle intervention. The operative had to act decisively but without exposure, employing persuasion, timing, and psychological insight to prevent escalation. They traced the noble's motivations, anticipated potential moves, and subtly guided choices through whispered conversations, carefully arranged encounters, and the strategic placement of information. Each intervention was invisible to the public eye, yet cumulatively, it prevented a violent outbreak that could have destabilized the region entirely. Simultaneously, the Black Pope coordinated across regions, ensuring that interventions were synchronized without revealing the order's presence. Operatives acted in unison, guided by manuscripts and intelligence gathered from months of observation. Every misstep, every unexpected human choice, was accounted for with rapid recalibration. A delayed message here, a subtle hint there, a carefully timed gesture to avert disaster. The confrontation revealed the true scale of the Shadow's intelligence. It could manipulate events across continents, exploit human ambition, and adapt to the Order's interventions with uncanny precision. The moral stakes of this confrontation were immense. Each action required the operatives to navigate not only the practical demands of intervention but also the ethical implications of guiding human behavior invisibly. Every decision carried the weight of potential consequences for countless lives. Yet the necessity of preserving the prophecy and historical balance outweighed the desire for transparency or recognition. The manuscripts emphasized that guardianship was not a position of power, but of responsibility, requiring courage, insight, and moral clarity in the face of forces beyond ordinary comprehension. In northern Italy, the rebellion reached its zenith at a strategically critical moment. The operative, having guided key actors into positions of compromise and conciliation, orchestrated a sequence of events designed to defuse tension while allowing citizens to feel that their agency remained intact. The Shadow's influence persisted, but through subtle intervention, the crisis was contained without overt conflict. The operative understood that success relied not on domination, but on guiding human choices in ways that aligned with both ethical imperatives and the trajectory of history as outlined by the prophecy. In Spain, rival noble houses found themselves brought to the negotiation table not by coercion, but by subtle manipulations that allowed each side to perceive its own interests as paramount. Timely messages, misdirected couriers, and carefully curated information created conditions in which compromise became the most rational path, even as the Shadow's influence threatened to tip events toward chaos. The operative's insight into human psychology, combined with the manuscript's historical guidance, allowed for interventions that preserved stability without exposure. France presented a different challenge. The emergence of clandestine networks, influenced both by the French Jesuits' prior deviations and the Shadow's adaptive strategies, threatened to undermine decades of carefully cultivated alliances. Here, intervention required not only observation but strategic disruption, introducing counter-narratives, redirecting information flows, and subtly influencing the decisions of key actors without drawing attention. Each action was a delicate balance between correction and concealment, ensuring that the Shadow's influence was mitigated without revealing the guardianship that had long preserved Europe's delicate equilibrium. By dawn, the immediate crises across northern Italy, Spain, and France had been contained. The operatives returned to Rome with detailed reports, mapping the Shadow's influence, assessing the effectiveness of interventions, and analyzing anomalies. The Black Pope convened the council once more, emphasizing the lessons learned from this first direct confrontation. The Shadow was not merely a force to counteract. It was an intelligence to study, understand, and anticipate. Its influence was pervasive, adaptive, and strategic, requiring a new level of coordination, insight, and moral discernment from the Order's guardians. The confrontation revealed profound truths about the interplay of human behavior, ambition, and morality. The Shadow exploited weakness, miscommunication, and ethical ambiguity, but human courage, ingenuity, and empathy proved equally influential. Every citizen, noble, and operative played a role, consciously or unconsciously, in the unfolding events. The manuscripts had long suggested that history was a living entity, shaped not only by power and prophecy, but by the countless choices of ordinary individuals. The events of this confrontation confirmed this lesson, emphasizing that even in the face of an adaptive, intelligent force, human agency remained a decisive variable. As the sun rose over Rome, the Black Pope, the operative, and the council reflected on the confrontation. They had survived the Shadow's first direct challenge, yet the lessons were stark. Intelligence alone was insufficient without ethical clarity, strategy required adaptation, and every intervention carried consequences both visible and invisible. The rising Shadow had tested their capacity, revealed vulnerabilities, and highlighted the extraordinary demands of guardianship. The Order understood that the challenges ahead would grow even more complex, requiring ingenuity, courage, and the unwavering moral compass that had guided them through centuries of history. The Shadow's influence spread subtly across Europe, probing the vulnerabilities of cities, alliances, and human ambition. Its intelligence was adaptive, patient, and relentless, testing moral choices at every turn. Florence, Venice, and Spain became stages for unseen manipulation, where small decisions carried immense consequences. The operative observed, recording patterns, noting how courage, insight, and ethical clarity could tip the balance against an almost omnipotent intelligence. In Florence, a minor citizen's hesitation prevented violence from spiraling. In Venice, the integrity of a merchant stabilized fragile trade networks. In Spain, careful negotiation by noble houses averted war. Each seemingly ordinary act revealed the Shadow's limits. It could manipulate circumstances, but it could not compel conscience, courage, or moral insight. The manuscripts hinted at a prophecy. The Shadow was not merely an adversary, but a mirror, reflecting human choices and ethical boundaries. The operative realized the confrontation was not about defeating the Shadow. It was about understanding it. Every intervention, every act of subtle guidance, was part of an ongoing dialogue between intelligence and morality. History itself became a living test, shaped as much by ordinary human action as by strategy or foresight. The Shadow observed, adapted, and tested, but human agency remained the ultimate force in determining equilibrium. The operative understood that their work was not only strategic but profoundly ethical, a guardianship of choice, courage, and conscience. The operative and the Black Pope knew that victory over the Shadow was never about domination. Its intelligence was patient, adaptive, and relentless, always probing, always testing. Their task was subtler: to preserve equilibrium, to guide events without forcing them, and to ensure that history unfolded without collapsing under its own weight. Europe, with its tangled alliances, fragile economies, and delicate social orders, was a chessboard where even the smallest move could have monumental consequences. Every city, every negotiation, every seemingly insignificant act of courage mattered. Florence, a city of art, commerce, and quiet ambition, had been a testing ground for the Shadow's probing. A dispute between rival families had threatened to ignite a cycle of violence, yet the subtle interventions orchestrated by the operative prevented escalation. Citizens unaware of the manipulation continued their daily lives, yet their choices, timely mediation, acts of integrity, and courageous restraint, carried outcomes far beyond their perception. Venice, a city of canals and commerce, revealed a similar pattern. The Shadow's influence tested loyalty, morality, and ambition within the merchant class. An ordinary act of honesty by a trader, a decision to preserve trust over immediate gain, stabilized a network that could have collapsed under greed and fear. Spain, with its delicate web of noble houses and political intrigue, had been a stage for patient negotiation, restraint, and ethical guidance. Even minor hesitations, small gestures of fairness or courage, redirected the currents of events in profound ways. The manuscripts provided clarity. The Shadow was not merely an adversary to be defeated. It was a mirror, reflecting human ethical choices and the consequences of moral action. It adapted to strategy but could not control conscience. Its intelligence could manipulate circumstances, anticipate reactions, and exploit weaknesses, yet it remained limited in its reach over courage, insight, and ethical discernment. History, it became clear, was co-authored. Human agency and the shadows tests intertwined, creating a tapestry both intricate and fragile. The operative realized that guardianship required more than vigilance. It demanded patience, subtlety, and moral clarity. To intervene overtly would be to impose control and risk unraveling the delicate balance. To guide subtly, to influence without dominating, to act with restraint when immediate action seemed tempting. This was the true art of preserving equilibrium. The Black Pope emphasized this principle. Our work is not to dominate events, but to nurture the moral and ethical forces that sustain them. Every choice, every act of courage or insight, ripples across time. Our guidance must be invisible, our interventions subtle, and our conscience clear. Across Europe, the consequences of these choices became evident. Minor acts, offering mediation in a tense dispute, showing restraint in negotiations, preserving integrity in commerce, shaped events far larger than any intelligence operation could dictate. The shadow had forced the order to recognize a profound truth. History was not controlled. It was preserved through courage, insight, and moral agency. Every intervention, every subtle guidance, reinforced this delicate web, ensuring that the balance of Europe remained intact. The operative understood that vigilance would never cease. The shadow's intelligence would rise again, testing boundaries, probing weaknesses, and reflecting human choices. Yet the lesson remained. History was a living continuum, fragile yet resilient, shaped not by domination, but by ethical courage, moral clarity, and subtle guidance. The order's task was eternal, demanding patience, insight, and humility, but its purpose was clear: to preserve equilibrium, safeguard human agency, and ensure that the tapestry of history remained whole. The aftermath of the climactic confrontation left Europe in a fragile equilibrium. Though the shadow's orchestrations had been contained, its intelligence had demonstrated a capacity for foresight and adaptation that far exceeded anything the order had previously encountered. Cities breathed cautiously, markets slowly resumed their rhythm, and nobles returned to their duties. Yet beneath the surface, the memory of near chaos lingered like a shadow stretching across the continent. For the operatives and the Black Pope, the sense of relief was tempered by an acute awareness that the true test was only beginning. The shadow had learned from their interventions, and its next moves would be more cunning, more insidious, and perhaps more audacious. In Florence, the operative walked through the city streets at dawn, observing a populace unaware of how closely their lives had been steered. Children played in sunlit squares, merchants called out prices in open markets, and the hum of daily life continued as though the turmoil had never existed. Yet every subtle choice the citizens had made, the decisions that prevented rebellion, the compromises that averted violence, was now part of a tapestry woven by both human agency and unseen influence. The operative reflected on the paradox. The shadow had tested them, yet human courage, insight, and empathy had proven decisive in preserving order. History, it seemed, was shaped not only by power or intelligence but by the interplay between human hearts and unseen forces. Reports from Spain painted a similarly delicate picture. Rival noble houses, though momentarily reconciled, remained on edge. The shadow's manipulations had left a residue of uncertainty, a reminder of the intelligence operating beyond perception. The operatives had guided decisions with subtlety and foresight, ensuring that compromise appeared organic, yet they understood that vigilance would be required indefinitely. Every alliance, every agreement, was a potential flashpoint, and the shadow's adaptive capacity meant that no resolution could be regarded as permanent. The order had preserved stability, but it was a stability that required constant observation, continuous intervention, and unwavering ethical discernment. In Venice, the economic network slowly regained cohesion. Merchants resumed trade, contracts were honored, and disputes dissolved with the appearance of natural resolution. The operatives' interventions had been invisible to all but a few trusted agents, yet the shadow had observed, calculated, and tested each decision, adapting its influence to probe new vulnerabilities. The lessons of Venice were clear. Intelligence alone could never fully predict human behavior, but it could exploit hesitation, fear, and ambition to devastating effect. The operatives recognized that guiding history demanded a delicate balance of strategic foresight, moral clarity, and the humility to accept that outcomes were never fully controllable. The Black Pope convened the council in Rome to review the cumulative consequences of the Shadow's orchestrations. The chamber, usually suffused with the quiet dignity of centuries, now carried the tension of lives, nations, and centuries of guardianship at stake. "We have contained the immediate threats," the Black Pope began, his voice resonant. "But we must not underestimate the Shadow's intelligence. It observes, it adapts, and it tests not only our strategy but our morality. Each intervention, each subtle act of guidance, has consequences that ripple far beyond the present moment. We have succeeded, yet the test is far from over." His words were met with solemn nods, the council acutely aware that the work of guardianship was both endless and morally complex. Amid the deliberations, a new pattern emerged from the operatives' observations. The Shadow seemed to learn not only from the Order's interventions but also from the choices of ordinary individuals. The manuscripts, once regarded as predictive instruments, now revealed a deeper truth. History was a living entity, shaped by the interplay of human agency, moral courage, and adaptive intelligence. Every act of empathy, every moment of courage or insight, had altered outcomes in ways previously unrecognized. The Shadow had accounted for human unpredictability, yet the resilience, compassion, and wisdom of ordinary people had become a variable even it could not fully control. The operative reflected on the profound lessons of this phase of confrontation. The Shadow's intelligence had tested strategy, morality, and foresight, yet it had also illuminated the extraordinary power of human choice. In Florence, the courage of a citizen who mediated a dispute had prevented violence. In Spain, a minor clerk's delay had averted a potential escalation. In Venice, a merchant's act of integrity had defused a potentially catastrophic conflict. The manuscripts had long suggested that human agency was pivotal, yet the confrontation had demonstrated with unprecedented clarity that history was co-authored by both human hearts and unseen intelligence. The council deliberated on long-term strategy. While immediate crises had been contained, the Shadow's adaptive intelligence meant that no region could be considered safe indefinitely. Contingency plans were developed to anticipate potential manipulations, interventions were refined to maximize subtlety and moral clarity, and operatives were assigned to observe and influence without revealing the Order's presence. The Black Pope emphasized that success required humility, patience, and unwavering ethical judgment. "We guide, but we do not dominate. We preserve, but we do not control." The Shadow teaches us that history is fragile, living, and infinitely complex. Our guardianship is a responsibility, not a weapon. Yet even amid strategic planning, the emotional weight of the confrontation lingered. The operatives, the council, and the Black Pope understood that victory was provisional. The Shadow had revealed its adaptive intelligence, its capacity for subtlety, and its ability to exploit both human ambition and moral ambiguity. Every intervention carried consequences, every ethical decision weighed heavily, and every failure, however minor, could propagate across generations. The confrontation had been a test of not only strategy and insight but also moral fortitude, and its lessons would shape the Order's approach for decades to come. The French Jesuit, whose earlier deviations had inadvertently illuminated the Shadow's strategies, became an unexpected source of reflection. Their actions had demonstrated both the fragility and resilience of human choice. A single deviation could provoke cascading consequences, yet insight, courage, and ethical intervention could restore equilibrium. The Council recognized that human agency was not merely a variable to manage but a force with its own power, capable of shaping history in ways even the Shadow could not fully predict. This realization reinforced the profound responsibility inherent in guardianship: to guide without coercion, to preserve without domination, and to act with wisdom tempered by humility. As weeks passed, the operative and the council observed the slow normalization of Europe. Cities resumed their rhythms, alliances solidified, and markets regained stability. Yet beneath this apparent calm, the lessons of the confrontation persisted. The Shadow had tested them, revealed vulnerabilities, and demonstrated an intelligence capable of shaping events with surgical precision. The operatives understood that vigilance was not optional, and that the preservation of history required continuous attention, subtle intervention, and unwavering moral clarity. The manuscripts, the prophecy, and the ethical framework of the order remained essential tools, guiding both observation and action in an ever-evolving landscape of influence. The emotional resonance of the confrontation was deeply felt. Human courage, empathy, and insight had proven decisive, yet the Shadow's intelligence had underscored the fragility of equilibrium. The operatives recognized that history was neither linear nor fully controllable. It was a dynamic, living interplay between unseen intelligence and human agency. Every success was a triumph not only of strategy but of moral discernment, patience, and the ethical navigation of complexity. The confrontation had tested the order's capacity to act invisibly, anticipate adaptive intelligence, and preserve moral and historical integrity under conditions of extreme uncertainty. By the end of this reflective phase, the operative returned to the Black Pope, sharing observations, insights, and lessons learned. The council absorbed these revelations with solemn understanding. The Shadow remained a formidable force, adaptive, intelligent, and relentless. Yet the order's vigilance, ethical clarity, and insight had preserved the delicate balance of history. The confrontation had revealed both the power and limitations of guardianship, the unpredictable impact of human choice, and the extraordinary demands of moral courage in the face of an unseen, adaptive adversary. The Black Pope concluded the council with words that echoed through the vaulted chamber. "We have faced the Shadow and preserved history, yet we must never forget that vigilance, wisdom, and moral clarity are eternal obligations. The Shadow will rise again, and so must our courage. Every act of guidance, every choice we preserve, is a testament to the resilience of human agency and the responsibility we bear to history itself. Let us remember that we guard not only events but the moral fabric that sustains them." The Shadow had been subdued, but its lessons lingered. Across Europe, cities and lives returned to rhythm, yet the operative understood the subtle orchestration behind the calm. The intelligence they had confronted was not a simple adversary. It was a mirror, reflecting human courage, weakness, and moral choice. Every act of empathy, every decision of restraint or insight, had shaped outcomes that no prophecy or intelligence could fully predict. The manuscripts now revealed their true purpose. The Shadow was a test, a reflection of ethical and moral discernment. It observed, adapted, and probed human decisions, yet it could not compel conscience or courage. History was alive, shaped as much by ordinary acts of courage as by strategy. Florence, Venice, and Spain had all shown that even small choices, mediation, integrity, patience, could ripple across time, preventing calamity and sustaining equilibrium. The Black Pope reminded the council, guardianship was not about control, but about preservation. Every intervention, subtle and ethical, ensured the delicate balance of history. The operative realized that vigilance, wisdom, and moral clarity were their true instruments. The Shadow had revealed its limits. Human agency, courage, and ethical insight were forces beyond its dominion. The confrontation was not a story of conquest, but of reflection, a profound understanding of the interplay between unseen intelligence and human choice. Rome moved quietly under dawn's light, its citizens unaware of the invisible forces guiding history. The operative observed ordinary lives, the merchant, the child, the cleric, and realized that human choice had been the decisive factor. Courage, insight, and moral clarity had shaped outcomes that no intelligence, no prophecy, could dominate. The Black Pope spoke of guardianship as a responsibility, not power. The Shadow, patient and adaptive, would rise again, yet it could never suppress conscience or ethical discernment. History was not controlled, it was preserved through subtle guidance and respect for human agency. The manuscripts confirmed this. Prophecy was not a prediction of events, but a framework for ethical guardianship. The operative reflected on the lessons. History is fragile yet resilient, shaped by moral courage and insight. Small acts, kindness, mediation, principled hesitation, had rippled across time, preserving balance. The shadow's presence reminded them that vigilance was eternal. Yet the triumph lay in understanding that human hearts, guided by conscience and wisdom, remained the ultimate architects of destiny. History, it seemed, was both lived and observed, shaped by unseen forces, yet governed by the enduring power of human choice. As the sun set over Rome, the operative looked across quiet streets, aware that the shadow lingered, patient and observant. Yet the events had revealed a profound truth. Human agency, moral courage, and ethical insight were the forces that truly shaped history. Strategy, foresight, and intelligence mattered, but they could not override the choices of conscience. Ordinary acts, helping a neighbor, standing firm in principle, mediating a dispute, had altered outcomes in profound ways. The shadow's adaptive intelligence was formidable, but it could only reflect, not dictate, human morality. History was alive, fragile, and resilient, woven from countless acts of courage and ethical discernment, observed but never fully controlled. The operative considered the prophecy one last time. It was not a map of events, but a mirror of potential, a reminder that vigilance and moral clarity were essential. The shadow would return, yet so would courage, empathy, and insight. The city continued its rhythm, ordinary yet extraordinary, carrying the hidden threads of guidance, choice, and resilience. What if all of history were shaped by such unseen currents? Every story, every event, every life might bear the mark of hidden forces, but also the enduring power of human choice. The shadow endured, but so did humanity's capacity for moral courage. History, fragile and luminous, continued to be co-authored by conscience, insight, and the subtle interplay between intelligence and the human heart. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ancient streets of Rome. The city, vibrant and alive, moved forward as it had for centuries, unaware of the invisible forces that had shaped its present. The operative stood quietly on a balcony overlooking the piazza, the wind brushing past, carrying the faint echoes of footsteps, laughter, and prayer. In that still moment, the culmination of months, perhaps even years, of vigilance, intervention, and subtle guidance pressed upon him. The shadow had been a test, the prophecy a guide, and human choice the decisive instrument in the preservation of history. It was a humbling truth. History was never fully controllable. Intelligence, strategy, and foresight were vital, yet they could never replace the courage, insight, and ethical discernment of ordinary people. Each seemingly small act, a gesture of kindness, a decision of conscience, a measured hesitation, had the power to shape outcomes far beyond immediate perception. The operative understood that the shadow, though patient and adaptive, was ultimately constrained by the moral choices of those it observed. Humanity, in all its fragility and resilience, remained the true architect of its destiny. As night settled, the city lights glimmered, illuminating rooftops and quiet alleys, revealing both the beauty and the mystery of life unfolding. The operative allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The shadow would return, new tests would arise, and the delicate equilibrium of history would always be under threat. Yet for now, balance had been preserved, and the tapestry of human choice, courage, and ethical insight shone brightly. What if this hidden thread, the invisible guidance, the reflection of human agency against adaptive intelligence, was present in all of history? Perhaps the stories we take for granted, the events we deem inevitable, are shaped by forces we rarely see, yet profoundly feel. The shadow endures, and so does the power of human choice.